I call to order the annual meeting of the Board of Regents of the University of Minnesota. Good morning, everyone. Before I call for a motion, I'd like to make one adjustment. For the past couple years, we've held our March meeting later in the month at the request of the administration. The date proposed in the docket follows this recent precedent, but it conflicts with some Regents' holiday plans. To resolve this, I recommend moving the meeting to March 30th and Thursday, March 31st. If there is support for this meeting schedule, including the change I've just mentioned, I entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
So move.
There is a motion, and I'll take the other motion as a second. Is there discussion on the motion? Not hearing any. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Regent Devine, would you give us a report of the nominating committee?
Yes, sir. Regent Beeson. The nominating committee, excuse me, the nominating committee met on May 15th, 21st, and 27th. During our meeting on May 27th, the committee voted to recommend the following individuals to serve as the board officers for the 2015 to 2017 term. Dean Johnson as chair, David McMillan as vice chair, Brian Steves as secretary, and Richard Fitzenreiter as treasurer. The committee took great care in developing this slate, and I'm confident that this leadership team will be effective in leading the board forward into the future. I move the nomination of the nominating committee be recommended as a slate.
Second.
Second is proposed by the nominations committee. Are there any additional nominees? Are there any additional nominees? Are there any additional nominees? Not hearing any. Will all those in favor say aye?
Aye.
Against? Motion carries. Thank you, Regent Devine, members of the committee, and congratulations, Regent Johnson and Regent.
He'll do that. But I did. He's working through it. Just so you know.
Yeah. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Well, that will conclude the annual meeting of the Board of Regents then. And I'll now call to order the monthly meeting of the Board of Regents. We're beginning today's meeting by recognizing this year's student representatives to the Board of Regents. President Kaler, would you join me at the podium? The student representatives fulfill an important role in bringing the student voice to the board's deliberations. We appreciate their perspectives and thoughtful comments on topics before the board. Several of the student representatives who have served over the past year are not able to be here today as they have commitments with summer internships or return home, but I still want to take a moment to recognize them this morning. Emily Caldas, a senior from Crookston, graduated with a degree in pre-veterinary animal medicine. Emily is originally from St. Paul. Damien Carriere, representing the Twin Cities graduate and professional students, is a PhD candidate in geography. Damien is originally from Renee, France. Ashka Joshi, a junior representing Rochester, is a pre-med student. She is originally from Maple Grove. Jessie Mara, a senior at the Twin Cities campus, graduated this spring with a degree in finance and marketing from the Carlson School of Management. Originally from Birdsville, Jessie is moving to Chicago to work as a pricing analyst at United Airlines. She plans to travel the world and go to graduate school, but eventually hopes to move back to Minneapolis. Jordan Wente, a senior from the Morris campus, graduated this spring with degrees in Spanish economics statistics. Jordan is currently working for the USDA Office of Rural Development in Washington, D.C. In the fall, he'll move to Copenhagen, Denmark, where he'll pursue an MSc in Renewable Energy Systems Engineering at the Technological Institute of Denmark. He plans to return to Minnesota in the near future to advance state and federal energy policy. We like hearing that they're going to return to Minnesota. That's where they belong. We also have 3 of the student representatives here with us today, and I ask them to come forward to the podium for a photo as I introduce them. Please remain in front of the room so we can get a group photo at the conclusion. Tyler Ebert, representing Twin Cities undergraduates, is a student studying entrepreneurial management. Tyler's from Wausau, Wisconsin. Tyler, and you're actually not here, okay? As it turns out. Saw him yesterday. Is Callie Livingood here? There she is. Okay, come on up, Callie. Representing also the Twin Cities undergraduates, served as vice chair. She's a sophomore majoring in political science and finance from Batavia, Illinois. We look forward to seeing Callie again next year as she'll again serve as student representative. And is Hannah here? Hannah, come on up. Senior at University of Minnesota Duluth, completing her second term as a student representative, serving as chair this year. Hannah graduated this spring with degrees in finance and human resources management with a minor in political science. Hannah begins her new career with the Target Corporation on Monday as an executive team leader. And as a former UMD soccer player, she plans to stay active in athletics by coaching youth soccer. Hannah's future plans include pursuing a graduate degree. You've really contributed greatly to the success of the university. On behalf of my colleagues and the administration and the president, I want to thank you, and we look forward to working with you next year, Callie, and best of luck, Hannah, as we go forward. So thank you very, very much. We'll do a photo.
You're really good. You're really good.
Abdul, you were a student rep too, right?
We have in front of us the minutes from our last meeting, and I would accept a motion to approve those.
So move.
Second.
Regent Cohen, Regent Johnson seconding. Any discussion on those minutes? Would all those in favor say aye?
Aye.
Against? That motion carries. Thank you. President Kaler, let's start today's business meeting off with a report.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And let me offer first my congratulations to Regent Johnson for his election to be our next chair and Regent McMillan for his election as our vice chair. I look forward to working with both of you in the months and years to come. I'd like to thank also the 8 student representatives to the board we just recognized. As a former student rep, I have a special place in my heart for you and the work you've contributed, and really appreciate the attention you brought to issues such as sustainability and financial literacy. And Hannah, thank you for your leadership of the group, and we look forward to welcoming Callie back. And in case you want to see your future in front of you, there's not one, but two, but three former student reps to the Board of Regents sitting around this oval this morning. So Regent Rocha and Regent Omari and myself. It's never too late to change direction if you want. So let me turn now to where we stand today at this meeting, which marks the end of the 2014-15 academic year and the completion of my first 4 years on the job. And looking back over those 4 years, with the help and guidance of the board, we have achieved much. We fought to keep this university affordable to students from all economic backgrounds, including our historic 2-year tuition freeze and the reallocation of administrative costs to the tune of more than $56 million en route to a $90 million goal. We've changed the way we move intellectual property to the marketplace. We've merged our foundations to make philanthropic giving more efficient, and that's paying off in what is expected to be, what I know will be, a record year in fundraising. We've created mHealth and reconfigured our partnership with Fairview and are poised to open our new ambulatory care center. We've experienced record applications to our Twin Cities campus, and the quality of our students has risen to be among the nation's best. We've consolidated our efforts to help the state close the educational achievement opportunity gaps, and we've worked with our faculty to create a bold Twin Cities campus strategic plan that's now being implemented. We've seen our campus community strengthen with the opening of new residence halls on Crookston, Morris, and Twin Cities campuses, and our combined endowment has grown almost $800 million over the past 4 years to $3.3 billion. According to my calendar, during these first 4 years, I've spoken more than 500 times to groups of donors, students, staff, campus visitors from around the world, chambers of commerce, healthcare, business, agriculture, arts, faith, medical device, legislative, and community leaders from our Twin Cities neighbors at the African Development Center to our friends in Marshall, Minnesota Rotary Club. All told, that outreach has put the university in front of tens of thousands of people. Our Twin Cities graduation rate is top 60%, and our 5-year rate is 75%. And there's much more. But putting aside those 4 years of work, let's just focus on the past 4 weeks since we last met. Past month alone, the powerful role we play in the state has been made crystal clear, and our success stories have been told nationally and locally. Right now, the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. is installing an exhibit called Places of Invention. In Minnesota, and the university's launch of the nation's medical device industry a half-century ago will be featured when the exhibit opens on July 1st. We are one of just 6 technology hotspots, along with, for example, Silicon Valley, on display for Smithsonian visitors, I hope Minnesota visitors too, to see for the next 5 years. That spirit of innovation continues with our researchers, and the past month proved that. It was reported that our physicians and researchers have begun to use one of the world's first 3D bioprinters to produce living tissue to help transplant patients and burn victims. We're a key partner on cutting-edge smartphone technology to help better the state's improve the state's DNR's management of fisheries, and we're leading the efforts by the federal government to save the monarch butterfly from extinction. We've been on the front lines of battling the avian flu epidemic that's hit our agricultural community hard. And a fascinating merger of music and climatology has gone viral on the internet as one of our students has taken the global temperature data and translated it into music for a string quartet, a partnership of our Institute on the Environment and the Twin Cities College of Liberal Arts. A great example of interdisciplinary understanding and student-driven curiosity and initiative. And our Gopher athletics teams have scored remarkably well in the classroom. This past month, 14 Gopher teams were honored with NCAA Academic Progress Report Public Recognition Awards, which means they scored in the top 10% in the nation. And that's a great snapshot of how our athletes are doing in the classroom. And in fact, of all 65 Football Bowl Series programs, our team's academic performance scored higher than any other public university, and behind only Stanford, Notre Dame, and Northwestern. You should think about that for a minute. It's remarkable. And finally, in about an hour, the legislature is set to convene its special session. And we hope by the end of the day, the state will invest more than $26 million to partner with us on 2 critically important veterinary laboratories that will have a deep impact for greater Minnesota and will upgrade antiquated facilities that have been used by our scientists around the clock to battle avian flu. In addition, the State Environment and Agricultural Bill, which remains a little bit in doubt, I must say, will invest $13 million in ag research, a way we have historically demonstrated the power of our land-grant mission to the people of the state of Minnesota. Excuse me. And of course, since our last board meeting, there were commencement exercises system-wide where we saw the future leaders of this state experience their special rites of passage, whether it be as a college graduate or earning an advanced degree. I know many of you attended these inspirational events, and I was at 3, reflecting the diverse role our university plays, giving hope to those who seek to better themselves in society, offering insights to some of the state's grand challenges, and producing the human capital that fuels our state and nation. And take, for example, the Twin Cities College of Education and Human Development's commencement. A young woman who moved from Cameroon at age 15, less than a decade ago, and knowing very little English, was selected as a student speaker and spoke eloquently of the impact of her education here. And that was the same day that a 74-year-old, he's almost 75, college and pro football Hall of Famer named Bobby Bell walked across the stage to get his diploma 56 years after first entering the university. As I've frequently said, I think we own the 56-year graduation rate this year. And to complete the circle, just this week, incoming students for the class of 2019 have begun orientation on the Twin Cities campus. The end of the second decade of the century, those students are here now. Now, as we turn the page on this academic year and look towards the next, I'm looking at my priorities and our opportunities. I want us to leverage our solid long-term relationships with the governor and legislative leaders so that they fully understand the deep and wide impact we have across the state, and so they embrace the unique nature of our research enterprise, and so they care, as we do, about the financial struggles of our students and their families. We have the opportunity to be a national leader on human subjects research, and this year, with the help of a distinguished implementation team, we will begin to get there with the highest ethical standards as our guide. There's great energy and change on our Grand Challenges agenda as we oversee and drive the Twin Cities Strategic Plan. And at every turn, we must take opportunities to see our Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester campuses thrive. Across our system, we must make it a priority to continue to work to create more welcoming, diverse, and equitable campuses. I aim to strengthen our partnership with our remarkable faculty and staff and our extraordinary students to make this a great place to work, learn, and live. On the philanthropy front, a major campaign is set to launch, and we have ambitious plans to move this university forward and to aid our students, faculty, and research enterprise. And as we've done so well in the past years, we have the opportunity to advance operational excellence, moving administrative costs to better uses. So in closing, Chair Beeson, this is the final meeting where I'll have the opportunity to thank you for your leadership during the past year. Thank you for your support and guidance as you led this board with a firm and caring hand. I truly appreciate it. And with that, Mr. Chair, I conclude my report.
Thank you, President Kaler. Well, I'd like to start my report today with a reminder that following this meeting at 12:30, the board will hold a public forum to hear comments from the university community on President Kaler's proposed operating plan for fiscal 2016 operating. Since our last meeting, Regents have been engaged in a number of activities throughout the university and the state, including Community Day at the Urban Research and Outreach Center, an event at UMD Glensheen on the shores of Lake Superior in Duluth, and presenting a Regents report to Skip and Barbara Gage, an honorary degree to Warren McKenzie, and the Seal Prize for Agriculture, all in addition to conferring degrees at 28 commencements with one final graduation ceremony to take place this weekend. I want to take a moment during my report today to make some comments on the work plan to improve the university's Human Plan Research Protection Program, which the board will vote on later this morning. We had a thorough discussion of the plan at the Audit Committee yesterday, and I appreciate Regent Rod's leadership and work in preparing for that meeting and conducting it. We'll be continuing to provide oversight as this important work now gets underway. Over the past month, we've heard from members of the community, patients, their families, university researchers with feedback about the importance of this research in their lives and ways to strengthen our processes to protect our most vulnerable patients. We listened and we questioned, and we are confident that the plan brought forth today by the implementation team will place the university at the forefront of human research protection. As I've said before, this is not the end, this is the beginning, and I can assure you that the board will continue to be fully engaged until we've seen every step that's been taken to improve and we've restored confidence in our research enterprise. Finally, I'd like to report on the work of the Presidential Performance Review Committee, which consisted of Vice Chair Dean Johnson, and Regent Peggy Lucas, and myself. The committee met on May 8th and May 21st. On June 10th, the committee met with President Kaler to discuss the report. As provided in state statutes, these meetings were closed. The report has been provided to each of you and is now being made available to the public. But I'd like to highlight a few items if I could. I'll then invite Regent Johnson to make a few comments, followed by Regent Lucas. If other regents would like to make remarks, I'd certainly recognize them as well. President Kaler's performance over the past year has been outstanding. He exhibits an unquestionable commitment to the University of Minnesota and entirely dedicates himself to positioning the U to meet the grand challenges of the state, the nation, and the world. Past reviews have noted his transparency and inclusiveness, and we echo that praise again this year. President Kaler has proven himself to be an ambitious, resilient leader. The strategic plan boldly calls for rejection of complacency. The university must not settle for good enough when excellence is within our reach. President Kaler's leadership has been vital to the development of such an energizing, energetic, and inspiring strategic outlook. Regent Johnson, would you care to add some additional comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board, President Kaler. In our visits with regents, students, donors, faculty members, administrators, Mr. President, you get high marks. You've done well during your tenure here, and during this past year, you continue to lead this university in a quality, thoughtful, and strategic way. You have the ability to manage challenges, and we have challenges at this university, and we'll have challenges in the future. And with your senior leadership team and in concert with this board, your managing of these challenges is extremely important. A couple of particular items of note, the issue of Umore Park, which this board and university struggled with for some time. We brought forth a recommendation, a resolution, and I believe we're moving in the right direction in that regard. We also put in place the progress card, kind of our status report, if you will, and checking on the status and implementation of various programs. And this is good from this standpoint. It's the potential to unify university leadership, drive performance, and provide greater accountability to the citizens of this state. Overall, Mr. President, as I said, you have received high marks, and we look forward to our continued working relationship with you in the future as you lead this university and leave your legacy upon this great institution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Johnson. Regent Lucas?
Thank you, Chair Beeson. This is my first time to participate in this process, and I thought it was a good one. I really enjoyed the outreach that I did, and I heard really good things. Two things I'd like to emphasize that I heard. One was your unflagging enthusiasm and willing to participate in philanthropy and the extra effort that you do to reach out. And of course, Karen Kaler's name came up in that regard over and over again. And we're so fortunate to have the team of you and Karen as we go down this path. The other thing that came out that I thought was really important and maybe is not noticed that much in your endeavor is your support of Gen Next and the closing of the achievement gap. I think you've done over and above what people think you've done, and I'd like to see that something that's highlighted in what people think about Eric Kaler and who he is. So I was very proud to hear that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Lucas. Any other comments from other members of the board this morning? Regent Devine.
I would just like to add to what's already been said here in the report. And I'd also like to congratulate the president on all of the work that he's done in the short period of time that he's been here. His attention to detail, his attention to the donor components of spending much time talking to them, being sensitive to that, and then reaching for greater numbers of donors overall. The work that is being done now that's touching the alumni and the athletic efforts, I think, are well noted, and it should be noted that I think I'm appreciative, and I think most of the board is appreciative of all the efforts that you've put forth, President Kaler.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Devine. Regent Cohen.
Thank you, Chair Beeson. What stands out for me, President Kaler, is your unwavering devotion to this university, and I think it comes across in so many areas, particularly what Regent Lucas mentioned in the area of fundraising, in the area of faculty relations and student office hours. Anyway, we really, really appreciate that. Thank you.
Regent Simmons.
Thank you, Chair Beeson. I really appreciate the work of the Performance Review Committee, and it brought evidence and data to my suspicion that we're in extraordinarily good hands. You've served this university and this state so well in the past 4 years, and you are going forward with great confidence from of the people and the Board of Regents.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Simmons. Regent Broad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think the committee missed something, and I just wanted to point out that I'm looking for the performance review of Mrs. Kaler, as we certainly do have a package deal, and I thank you both.
Thank you.
I'll echo that comment as well. Thank you, Regent Broad. Thank you again, Regent Kaler, President Kaler, for 4 years of outstanding service.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, we'll move along then, and we're going to file and receive reports. Report of the academic professionals, administrators, consultative committee, and the quarterly report of grant and contract activity. Number 6, we have consent report, which will be reviewed and acted upon. Appointment of Regents professors, report of the All University Honors Committee, and gifts. Is there a motion to approve the consent report?
Also move.
Regent Anderson moves, Regent Simmons seconds. Is there any discussion on that motion? Not hearing any. Would all those in favor say aye?
Aye.
Against? Motion carries. Thank you. And Professor Roper's Heumann is next with our Faculty Consultative Committee report. Good morning. Good morning. Good to see you again.
Chair Beeson, incoming Chair Johnson, members of the board, and President Kaler, thank you for the opportunity to address the board with this spring FCC committee report. As I come to the end of my term as FCC chair, I'm pleased to reflect on the work that faculty governance has invested in over the past year. In my last report to you, I stressed equity and diversity, graduate education, faculty and staff engagement, and the strategic plan. While these do indeed continue to be important priorities, I turn my attention in this report to issues that demanded our attention more directly during this last spring semester. I recognize that this has been an intense time for you as the Board of Regents, for President Kaler, for Provost Hanson and their teams, and for faculty who participate in the governance of this institution. In a very real sense, we are all in this together as we seek to celebrate, strengthen, and fix various parts of our university that we all hold dear. This year, we have focused attention in faculty governance on issues of equity and diversity. After much consultation, the use of demographic identifiers and crime alerts was changed to better balance the need for safety with the need for an inclusive campus climate. The FCC has consulted with the Women's Faculty Cabinet on a caregiver resolution that would support faculty members who need to take time to care for their families. We supported Provost Hanson's decision that the Salary Equity Review Committee, or the CERC, as you may have heard, should be ongoing to ensure that if salary inequities do indeed occur, that they are addressed quickly. Many people across the institution are working to promote a more inclusive campus environment that welcomes people with different identities and beliefs. It is the right thing to do for reasons related to the economy, to the university's sustainability, to our communities, and simply for social justice. Faculty governance is a key part of these efforts. We have focused attention as well on the strategic plan. Several members of faculty governance are on the Provost Strategic Plan Continuity Team. On that team, we collaborate with the provost and other faculty and staff to provide input into the process of implementing the strategic plan. In addition to that participation, faculty more broadly have been asked to generate ideas that would incorporate grand challenges into the curriculum and into our research priorities. Chairs have been invited to speak with each other and with Provost Hanson to discuss how they can implement the plan in their units, because we know that departmental implementation is going to be so incredibly important in this plan. Much work has been done to involve the campus community in moving the plan forward, and we should begin to see the fruits of our labor in the upcoming year. We have focused attention as well on the budget reallocation process. In the spring, the FCC met with 3 groups of chairs from across the Twin Cities campus, as well as with the TC deans, the Twin Cities deans. While each of these conversations was robust and multifaceted, one concern that was regularly articulated focused on how the budget reallocation process is impeding the capacity of many units to do the work that they envision. We heard repeatedly that while reallocation efforts were intended to promote operational excellence and administrative efficiency, units are now faced with the reality of having to cut resources from their core mission of teaching, research, and outreach. The promise of the strategic plan and the success of units across our university will, of course, be affected by how we allocate our resources. The FCC has worked over the past several years and quite intensely this spring to prompt increased oversight of clinical research and at the university. This spring, as you know, 2 major reports were complemented by news articles, public debate and inquiries, formal conversations in governance, and informal conversations throughout the university and, frankly, throughout our communities. The FCC largely supported President Kaler's decision to respond to those reports by forming an implementation team and orienting the institution to the future. We asked that 2 of our FCC members, Jean Wyman and Will Durfee, be appointed to that team, and our request was honored. Faculty debate and dialogue around this issue has been vigorous, as you all know. Faculty involvement in ensuring that we develop a system that meets our own and others' high standards will be as well. So a year ago at this time, FCC Chair Will Durfee said that the FCC was trying to move from a reactionary model in faculty governance to one that is more strategic, working with administration in meaningful ways to address issues that we think are important in addressing the well-being of the institution. Through this strategic lens, it has become clear that the leadership of any research university needs to balance complementary values that can seem in competition for time, attention, and resources. How do we ensure free speech that is so essential to teaching and learning and create a positive campus climate for all? How do we meet Minnesota's needs and the needs of our partners across the world? How do we distribute resources fairly and recognize the unique needs of our campuses and units? And how do we facilitate agreement about what it means to get a University of Minnesota degree while allowing individual units and individual students to craft their own unique paths? One of the most important roles of faculty governance is to work with the Board of Regents and senior administrators to ensure that each of these values gets the attention that it deserves. This partnership will continue over new leadership with new leadership next year. Beginning in July, the FCC will be led by Colin Campbell, a pharmacologist in the medical school whose work centers on increasing the effectiveness of cancer treatment. And Jigna Desai, a scholar with affiliations in gender, women, and sexuality studies, Asian American studies, and Asian languages and literatures. Professors Campbell and Desai have both demonstrated extraordinary commitment to this university, and all of us will benefit from their leadership. In closing, I want to say that when I came to the University of Minnesota in 2007, I was immediately impressed by the dedication and commitment that I saw in my department. When I asked a senior professor what the expectations were in our unit, he replied, "Do what you love and do a lot of it." I quickly learned that this approach existed throughout the College of Education and Human Development and in many other parts of the university. Over this past year, my view has expanded even further. I know that in Rochester, our colleagues are working hard to establish an organizational and governance structure that supports the unique needs of their campus and advances the excellence that we expect throughout the university. I have heard from our faculty colleagues at Duluth who want to find a way to have a stronger voice in governance and want to work through the bargaining relationship that makes this, frankly, complicated. Chancellor Wood told me about the important role that Crookston plays in serving its students through both on-campus and a robust online program. I was at a ceremony where a student leader from Morris received the Scholarly Excellence in Equity and Diversity Award and talked about the work on that campus supporting underrepresented students and organizations in campus governance and throughout campus and academic life. I am convinced from my experiences this past year that while instances of complacency do exist, they do so within a culture of passion, dedication, and love for the teaching, research, and outreach that we do here at this institution. I am so appreciative that I was able to broaden my view of the university over this past year. In doing so, I am even more proud to be a part of this institution and its shared governance, and I want to thank each of you for your investment in the institution. And with that, I'll conclude my report.
Regent Simmons.
Thank you, Chair Beeson, and thank you so much for your service. It's been extraordinarily important, not only to this board, but to the whole university. I really appreciate hearing your system-wide view and embracing us as what we truly are, such a marvelous, complex organization. I'd like to also share with you my concern for something you raised, and that is with our severe budget cuts from funding from the state, hearing that it is threatening, not just threatening, it is impinging on the core mission is disturbing and not surprising. And I think I heard you say, and if I did, I really liked it because I agree with it, you really linked the fact that the strategic plan is what rescues us. It helps us as an institution prioritize our precious resources and use them to fulfill the mission and not compromise it. I want to thank you for that. And just couple with that the importance of the work the President has undertaken to find additional sources of funding for the university, supporting research funding, supporting philanthropy, looking for those other dollars that we need to replace.
Thank you, Regent Simmons. Professor, would you join us at the podium, please?
Following her final report, it's now my pleasure to honor Professor Rebecca Ropers-Hillman, the outgoing chair of the Faculty Consultative Committee, which serves as the executive committee of the Faculty Senate. Rebecca has been a steady and thoughtful partner the past year, which has been marked by especially close collaboration with our faculty leadership amidst some major challenges and opportunities. She's smart and savvy, but the word that comes to mind is considerate. She is remarkably considerate and receptive to others' opinions. Of course, that comes from her role as the nation-leading scholar of higher education as chair of CEHD's Department of Organizational Leadership, Policy, and Development. As FCC chair, we have seen her put her vast knowledge and expertise into effective and pragmatic practice, and that has been extraordinarily impressive and very, very much appreciated. For all of that and your excellent service, Professor Ropers-Hillman, I thank you very much. Mr. Chair.
I'd like to read this certificate, Professor. The Regents of the University of Minnesota recognize with great appreciation the exceptional achievements and dedication of Professor Rebecca Ropers-Hillman, 2014-15 Chair of the Faculty Consultative Committee and the Senate Consultative Committee. As chair during this past year, Professor Ropers-Hillman has been an advocate for faculty while providing effective leadership in consultation with the President, senior leaders, and the Board of Regents. She has skillfully led governance involvement in several important university issues, including the implementation of the Twin Cities Campus Strategic Plan, the restructuring of graduate and professional education, and efforts to create a more welcoming and inclusive campus environment. Most notably, Professor Ropers-Hillman guided the Faculty Senate through the ongoing assessment and enhancement of the university's Human Research Protection Program. The University of Minnesota has benefited greatly from Professor Roper-Hillman's thoughtful stewardship of faculty governance and is deeply grateful for her integrity, commitment, and contributions to the greater good. On behalf of the entire university community, the Regents of the University of Minnesota express their deepest gratitude to Professor Rebecca Ropers-Hillman for her outstanding leadership and for her remarkable dedication and service presented this 12th day of June, 2015. Professor?
Rebecca, we need to make a photograph.
She came to me the day of 2016.
I haven't heard him make a photograph for years.
Stuff like that.
Okay, next item on the agenda, number 9, Board of Regents Policy Code of Ethics for members of the board. This is an annual review, and of acting General Counsel Smith would please come to the table to present this report. Morning, Tracy.
Good morning. Chair Beeson, members of the Board of Regents, President Kaler, thank you for this opportunity to review the Code of Ethics for members of the Board of Regents. In this policy, you commit to publicly reviewing the requirements and procedures of your Code of Ethics with the assistance of your General Counsel. Your intrepid General Counsel, Bill Donahue, asked me to fill in for him today. I'm happy to do so. You have required this review of the policy to publicly commit yourselves to serving the people of Minnesota in accordance with the highest ethical standards. This policy expresses your ethical code with respect to 4 areas important to maintaining independent judgment and public confidence. Those 4 areas are financial disclosure, gifts, expense reimbursement, and conflicts of interest, and we'll run through those. I think you have the policy in your docket materials, and we can briefly walk through it together. Section 1 of the policy is devoted to the guiding principles. The first and most important principle is that as a regent, you are carrying out a public trust to govern one of Minnesota's most important institutions. By virtue of that trust, you hold yourself accountable with respect to the 4 areas I noted. And you agree not to use your position of trust to solicit private financial, social, or political benefit. Second principle, no matter your background and expertise, you will keep the welfare of the entire university and not the interests of a particular constituency as your paramount interest. And the third principle you have established is that you will commit the time to fulfill your responsibilities. And as you know better than I, your service as a regent requires extraordinary effort and time. The next sections on the first page of your policy address 3 of the 4 substantive areas in the Code of Ethics. Section 2 addresses financial disclosure requirements. It provides that on election and annually thereafter on March 31st, you will file financial disclosure statements with the board secretary. General Counsel Donahue has informed me that as required by this policy, he has reviewed this year's disclosures and found them to be in compliance. Section 3 of the policy addresses gifts. Here, you commit that you will not accept gifts except as permitted by board policy. There's another Regents policy called Gifts Received and Given by Regents and University Officials, which defines and regulates gifts. It's also an important policy to be familiar with. The major principles of it are: do not accept gifts from persons or organizations having business before the board, do not give gifts to government officials or their staff. Section 4 on page 1 deals with expenses and simply explains that you are not compensated for your service as a regent, but you are entitled to reimbursement for your expenses. The rest of the policy deals with the 4th very important element of your code, which is conflict of interest. This policy recognizes that in a complex and interconnected society, conflicts of interest will occur. This is true for regents who come to their positions with a broad set of business and community experiences and connections. What's important is how those conflicts are addressed. This policy requires that when there is an actual or potential conflict of interest, the regent recuse him or herself regarding the matter and not take any action to influence the outcome of the matter. You can find that recusal requirement in Section 6, Subdivision 5 of the policy. That's on page 3. The rest of the sections on these pages describe what a conflict of interest is and how to proceed if you have one. Section 5 of the policy defines a conflict of interest. There are 2 kinds: financial and employment related. A financial conflict of interest has 3 elements. It exists when you, your family member, or a business associated with you has an actual or potential financial interest or any other interest in a matter before the board that may impair your independence of judgment or objectivity. An example of a financial conflict of interest is if you have a son or daughter who is an employee or director of a company that has a contract pending before the board. The second kind of conflict of interest is an employment-related conflict of interest, and that occurs when a regent's employment relationship may impair independence of judgment and can apply even if your business does not have a matter specifically pending before the board. There are other definitions in that section: what's a family member, what's a business associated, and so on. I leave that to you to review. Section 6 of the policy then tells you the procedure for determining if you have a conflict of interest and how to handle it. In the first instance, you are the person who determines if you have a conflict of interest. If you do, you should tell the chair of the board and the committee chair about the conflict, and then not participate in discussion about or the vote about the item. Recusal should be stated out loud. The policy requires that it be noted in the minutes. And it's recommended that you actually leave the room for the item where a conflict of interest exists, so there's no doubt about your lack of participation on the matter. If you're unsure whether you have a conflict of interest, the policy provides that you should consult with the general counsel. Our office will discuss it with you and provide you with advice, and if requested by you or the chair, the general counsel will provide a written opinion. If there's any dispute as to whether a conflict exists, the issue goes to the chair, who can either decide the question or refer it to an ad hoc group of regents as further described in the policy. Either way, the decision then is reported to the full board, which retains final authority on the question. Finally, at the end of the policy, there are 2 provisions of particular note. One, Section 7, provides that a regent shall resign from the board if running for partisan elective public office, and Section 8 provides that, with the exception of the student seat, regents cannot be compensated university employees. Those are the outlines of the policy. As I mentioned, it suggests consultation with the general counsel on conflict of interest issues, and we do that at least annually, I would say. We also provide advice on the gifts policy. I hope you will contact us if you have any questions. People have always been diligent to do so. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. This is a required annual review of the board. Are there any questions about this policy? Any questions about the policy? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The President's recommended 2016 annual operating budget is next up on the docket. And I believe Mr. Fitzenreiter will be making his way to the table.
And Ms. Tonneson.
And Ms. Tonneson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pleased to be joined by Vice President Fitzenreiter, Associate Vice President Tonneson, who have done an enormous amount of work in preparing this budget for your review today and action later in the month. A budget really is a reflection of values and priorities. And my proposed operating budget for fiscal year 2016 for your review today mirrors my priorities and remains true to our values to keep the University of Minnesota accessible, affordable, and committed to academic excellence. It continues our pledge to a culture of operational excellence and accountability for our students and their families, the legislature, and all Minnesotans. Confirms my deep appreciation for the extraordinary work of our talented faculty and staff on all of our campuses. It invests in critical priorities across the system, from our medical school to Crookston's new wellness center. This proposal must be seen in the context of our recent state appropriation, which fell short of our goal to freeze tuition for 2 more years for Minnesota residents. As you know, we sought to freeze tuition for all Minnesota resident undergraduates and graduate students, and to do so, that required us to reduce and reallocate costs, which we have done, and a $65.2 million state appropriation. Unfortunately, the legislature decided to provide us with a base operation and maintenance budget increase of only $22.2 million, $11.1 million annually. While we fought hard at the legislature for the tuition freeze, the unfortunate reality is that with a state surplus of more than $2 billion, the legislature could not find a way to partner with us to freeze tuition for more than 50,000 families. Still, the good news is that by reallocating administrative costs, along with new investments in financial aid that I'll describe shortly, we will keep tuition increases and their impact to a minimum. We are ahead of schedule on our goal to reduce administrative costs by $90 million over 6 years. Halfway through that period, we've met more than 64% of our goal. And Mr. Chair, members of the board, this is important. But for our commitment to reducing administrative costs, a larger tuition increase would be necessary. Still, today I'm proposing a tuition increase of 1.5% for Minnesota residents, which is an increase of about $180 per student next year. An increase is still an increase, and I don't like it, but it will be the smallest tuition increase at this university in the last 15 years. And as I will more fully explain in a few minutes, a full 42% of our resident undergraduates will have this tuition increase mitigated or completely offset by new financial aid investment. This budget, in my view, clearly demonstrates that the university is committed to affordability, accountability, and excellence. So let's walk through this proposed budget, our revenues, our costs, how we'll invest, and why. First, our total budget will be $3.7 billion for the coming fiscal year. And as you see from the pie chart, about 18% of that budget is from state funds, tuition is 25%, and other elements are outlined here for you: grants and contracts, sponsored activity, auxiliary enterprises, gifts and endowment income, etc. For the coming fiscal year, we'll see a change from FY15 of $78.5 million in additional state appropriation and tuition resource. The largest change for this incremental budget is the result of unit reallocation of resources. Here are some details of those new state appropriation and tuition resources. To really drill down, our reallocations generally reduce expenditures in one area and redistribute those resources to a higher priority use. And the majority of reallocation are changes in personnel costs through the elimination of positions. mostly via retirement or attrition, but with some reductions in general operating costs. Examples are centralizing information tech services for CFANS, the law school, and extension. In total, we will see an estimated reduction of over 70 full-time equivalent positions in FY16 through these decisions. Let me turn now to my proposal for tuition and fees. We will limit the impact of a tuition increase for many of our Minnesota resident undergraduates. With savings from reallocations, plus the increase in state funding, we're proposing to buy down the resident undergraduate tuition rate from what would have been a 3% increase to 1.5%, and the graduate professional rate from 3.5% to 2.5%. For our non-resident, non-reciprocity students, I propose a 7% tuition increase on our Twin Cities campus and 3% on our Duluth campus. For those students on our Twin Cities campus, we'll pay $8,420 more than a Minnesota resident and $39.50 more at UMD. Of course, we remain committed to our national and international recruitment programs in order to maintain geographical diversity, which is very important on our campuses, and to giving those students the opportunity for an outstanding education. Some of you and some members of the legislature have questioned why we don't increase tuition for out-of-state students even more. And I agree that our goal should not be to be at the bottom of the Big Ten in anything. However, we need to be thoughtful about how quickly we can raise that rate while also maintaining enrollments of highly qualified students. But I've listened to these comments, and today I'm proposing an alternative that would be a 10% increase for your consideration, would boost the annual tuition gap on the Twin Cities campus between Minnesota residents and non-resident, non-reciprocity students to a full $9,000. Under that scenario, I would propose to use the increased revenue to help expand our You Promise Scholarship program to families with annual incomes of up to $120,000. And Mr. Chair and members of the board, I look forward to your conversation to gauge your interest in such an alternative. This slide provides the full picture of the total increase of tuition, fees, room, and board for a typical Minnesota undergraduate Twin Cities campus student. And as you see in the highlighted cells, tuition and fees will increase an average of $230, or 1.7%. For a student who lives in a residence hall, he or she will see a total increase of $420, or 1.9%. The primary driver for the room and board increase is inflationary, the cost of utilities and the increase in minimum wage for resident hall employees, most of whom are undergraduate students themselves. With these increases, our Twin Cities campus is expected to rank 14th out of the 14 Big Ten universities next year. So we are at the bottom of the Big Ten in that. And I will note that the general rate of inflation for 2014 was 1.6%. On our system campuses, the percentage increases will be similar, ranging from 1.6% at Rochester to 2.2% at UMD and Morris in room and board increases. But as I mentioned earlier, for more than 40% of our Minnesota resident undergraduates, the tuition increases will be paid by someone else. Pell Grant awards for students from the lowest income families are moving up by $45 per student. A substantial boost in the state grant program will mean as much as a $550 increase over a student's current award, depending on family income. And that means for our lowest income families, those with incomes under $30,000 a year, financial aid will cover about 111% of the cost of tuition and fees. The university will increase our Promise Awards for students from families in the $80,000 to $100,000 income range, specifically to offset the $180 increase in tuition. So net tuition for students with family incomes of $100,000 and below will remain flat through this combination of institutional aid and state and federal resources. And that is about 42% of our students system-wide. 42% of our students will not see the tuition increase. As I mentioned earlier, I am open to an alternate approach. If we increase tuition for our non-reciprocity, non-resident students by 10%, we can raise the cap on our Promise Scholarship up to $120,000 adjusted gross income. And that would mean that 48% of our Minnesota resident undergraduates would see the increase covered by financial aid. The fact is, as this slide shows, since the Great Recession, beginning of my presidency, aid has risen faster than tuition for students from the lowest income family. And since 2011, the typical grant award has increased by $2,200. The bar here is the tuition and fees level, and the makeup of the financial aid from its three components are shown by the different colors and hashes. So for students from Minnesota's lowest income families, a typical need-based aid package will actually exceed a 1.5% tuition increase. And Mr. Chair, members of the board, I think the message is clear in whichever scenario you choose to go. And that message should be that we are committed to making this university affordable for Minnesota students and families from all economic backgrounds. So where do we need to invest? Affordability, accountability, a great faculty and staff, a nationally recognized medical school, and academic excellence are critical variables in the formula for a great university. We plan to invest 62% of the $78.5 million in new resources towards critical academic investments. For example, the first installment to strengthen our human subjects research program, consistent with the recommendations of an external review and implementation report recently released. To launch innovative programs like the one in the Twin Cities College of Liberal Arts, which will help connect liberal arts degrees to career pathways. To hire and fund exciting innovations blossoming from our Twin Cities strategic plans. And among our system campuses, I'm proposing investments, substantial investments, for the University of Minnesota Duluth for a strategic enrollment initiative. I do want to address the importance and value of the $23 million slice in the pie chart for compensation. This represents a 2% merit-based salary pool for faculty and staff. A great institution requires exceptional employees, and we operate in a global market for top scholars, researchers, and academic professionals. We must compensate them fairly. All told, in our entire $3.7 billion budget, more than 60% of our costs are for our people. Simply put, we are a people business, particularly when we seek to improve our graduation rates, to provide counseling and advising, and, as our Twin Cities strategic plan envisions, attract and retain field-shaping faculty. And to make no mistake, we are competing for top scholars against our peer institutions. This is a slide Vice President Kathy Brown shared with the board last month. It shows that in the Big Ten, our faculty compensation trails that of Michigan, Illinois, Ohio State, and Penn State, and that over the past 3 years, we've actually begun to fall further behind. For other national peer institutions, with one exception, the University of Florida, we lag in faculty salaries. I don't believe that's sustainable if we want to attract and retain the sort of faculty and staff that will bring external research funding, achieve breakthroughs in creating new knowledge, solving grand challenges, and finding cures and treatments for disease. It is not sustainable if we want top-notch scholars to prepare our students for the workforce of tomorrow and to see them graduate in 4 years. We need exceptional talent to meet the demands and expectations of our students, their families, and of course, the state policymakers. Which leads to how this budget reflects our commitment to accountability, our state, and our students. As you know, the legislature has made 5% of the university's FY17 appropriation, $28 million, contingent on us meeting performance goals. We'll get all $28 million for achieving 3 of the 5 goals, with a pro rata share for fewer than 3. Those goals include increasing graduation rates for students of color, increased number of undergraduate STEM degrees, increasing graduation rates overall, the reallocation of $15 million in administrative costs, and an increase in invention disclosures for FY16 over FY15. Those are important goals. They align with what we want to do, and I am hopeful and confident we can reach them. This slide shows how we've reallocated almost $58 million towards our $90 million goal over the next 6-year period. As I mentioned, we are ahead of schedule, achieving 64% of our goal in 3 years. In the FY16 period, reduction will come in a variety of activities, including unit-level reallocations and the administrative reductions in other non-sponsored funds. And you heard from Professor Ropers-Hillman, these are cuts that are hard to do. This is not easy work by any sense of the word. So to review, this proposal benefits from operational excellence because, except for our administrative reductions, even steeper tuition increases would be necessary. The proposal is accountable to the legislature and taxpayers. It invests in key academic areas and in our employees. It does increase tuition for Minnesota resident undergraduates 1.5%, but because of increased aid, the impact of that tuition rise will be mitigated or completely covered for 42% of Minnesota resident undergraduates. Or if the board decides to increase tuition by 10% for non-resident students, as many as 48% of our Minnesota residents would not be affected. So in the end, this budget proposal reflects my commitment to access and affordability and to operational and academic excellence. With that, I will welcome your questions and rely upon my colleagues at the table for detailed answers, but I believe a discussion is in order, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the overview, and staff for preparing to where we are today as we go into our deliberations period and into our public hearing. So I will now open this up to our colleagues to discuss the proposed budget. Regent Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, President Kaler. Let me, under the banner of maybe perceptions, and perceptions especially with our friends in St. Paul that we rely on certainly, and you have developed a very positive relationship with the governor and members of legislature. But in listening to their discussion on the higher ed issue, as it relates to the non-resident, many of them believe that we just simply don't charge enough and that Minnesota residents should be given a break, if you will, in their tuition. And following that, I don't hear much discussion if we raise the tuition for non-residents, whatever that percentage is, that we begin to lessen the pool of applicants that we want to continue as a quality education. I think the benchmark you've cited is 28.2 in the ACT test scores. I think that's a policy decision, Mr. President. You know, are there certain colleges that perhaps we'd want to lower that to 27 or 26? I don't know, but I think it's worth considering so that our seats are filled. Minnesota students have an opportunity to apply and be accepted at the university. We increase, I mean, that feeling or perception in St. Paul is very strong about non-residents, that somehow they're not paying their fair share to attend the University of Minnesota. I'm deliberating in my own mind about this. Can you provide some guidance?
Chair Beeson, Regent Johnson, I certainly can. It's not a matter that we've not given considerable thought to. You really raised two questions. One is, both of them are enrollment management, but let me address them a little bit separately. Since I arrived, this board has articulated very, very clearly to me two goals. One is to drive four-year graduation rates to higher levels, and the second is to continue to focus on students of high ability, and a proxy for high ability is an ACT score. So let me talk about the ACT enrollment management first. There is a joke in higher education that says A students become professors, B students go to work for you, and C students get rich and donate buildings. And there's a little bit of truth to that. I think all of us can reflect anecdotally on people who were perhaps not at the top of the class who've gone on to great, great success. Number one. Number two is the ACT score is in fact not probably the best proxy for academic success that a student could reflect, which is why we do a holistic assessment of a student's application. And so perhaps we could reflect as a board, and it absolutely is a board policy decision, that in some areas perhaps we would be comfortable with an academic record that doesn't reflect an ACT score. And again, these students, and I'm sorry for an uncharacteristically long-winded answer to your question, but there are a couple of points to make. Students who don't have the benefit of a family background that provides with ACT preparation or the investment in a high-quality high school are going to perform more poorly. But is that a reflection of what they're likely to achieve at the university? I think you can wonder about that. So to your point, we have a lot of conversations about about this, and I frequently talk about the university community in general needing to free itself of the tyranny of the U.S. News and World Report rankings, where that ACT score and four-year graduation rate rank prominently. So I think that's an enrollment management conversation that we're eager to have, not merely happy to have, and I do think it reflects a board decision about the direction that we go. This has corollary issues about enrollment of students from greater Minnesota, et cetera. And briefly to your point of undergraduate tuition, it's very clear that there are voices in the legislature who think we should simply move to the midpoint in a single step, which would be devastating to our retention of out-of-state students, which paradoxically, of course, would lower our four-year graduation rate since these students would leave. So these are very tightly coupled phenomena. The question is really what is the price elasticity in out-of-state tuition? One can make an argument, as Regent Rocha has done with me, and sorry to put you on the spot there, that the elasticity is actually substantial, that students will come if you raise tuition, and the fact that we've done that with in-state tuition 3 years in a row of 14% increases argues in favor of that. At the same time, I think we have an obligation to our out-of-state students and their families to not dump that on them in one fell swoop. And so this leads me to the point of a 7 to 10% increase, which I fully understand will cause pain for some families, and we hope to mitigate some of that with additional financial aid. So again, sorry for such a long, rambling answer to your two questions.
Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on that point, and Regent Johnson, chime in on this. It seems that the concern isn't necessarily just a matter of, as a kind of a basic concept, that there should be this giant gap between them. I think there's a perception that by having a much narrower gap than our peer institutions, that we are favoring students from outside the state. And I think that's the concern, because that's what the legislator will tell you is the biggest concern the most calls they receive from constituents is that family that has been a huge University of Minnesota supporter, possibly legacy and so on, but their kid can't get into the university anymore, and we've got this low rate for out-of-state students, and so there appears to be somewhat of a preference almost. Now I would argue that there's still a gap and so on. I don't know if that's consistent with what you're hearing, but I've thought a lot about over the last several months about the ACT and the in-state out-state balance, and one of the questions that I would pose to the President and administration is, we've seen comparisons of where we are for the in-state, the resident and the non-resident, non-reciprocity mix. But when you think about it, Minnesota has, annually the highest or one of the highest two ACT scores, the highest graduation rates. If there were an institution that could still maintain excellence, but have a high percentage or a higher percentage of resident students, of in-state students, it would seem to be a state where our commitment to education at the E12, K-12 level and the number of students that we have that come out well prepared for college would certainly be that case. If you're a state with a low preparation for your students, you're obviously going to have a lot of those kids. You're going to have to require kids from outside your state if you want to have top performers at your state university. So, I don't know if you think, is that a fair statement that we would be the state or one of the 2 or 3 states in the nation that would have the ability to be excellent and have a high percentage of in-state students?
Regent Rocha, Chair Beeson, the metrics of our out-of-state students are slightly above those of the in-state students. So, in fact, they do enrich the pool, again, using class rank and ACT as proxy for academic achievement. So we are better in some sense for that. And again, it's a matter of board policy, and we will execute on what you want us to do, but within reasonable bounds. But the balance is important, and I do think that having students from non-reciprocity, non-resident, have non-reciprocity states does help the experience of the university. The students themselves benefit from that geographical diversity, and I think, frankly, we've hit it about right on. I think the entering class ranges in the low 60% of Minnesota students, about 16% reciprocity states. and we're trying to grow the number of out-of-state students, maybe at the expense of reciprocity states, to get to the right mix. And when you include the transfer students, the undergraduate student body is about 70% Minnesota students. So to me, that feels right. If the sense of this group is to move in a different direction, we can do that without a huge diminution in ACT quality. But I would challenge on the importance of having geographical diversity. Final point I'll make on that is that we serve as a talent magnet. I talk about an out-of-state student who comes, falls in love with a boy from Roseville and settles in Minnesota. That's a plus for the state.
Mr. Chair,
Follow up, Regent Rocha.
well, yeah, that wasn't actually the question. My point was, or the question that I was asking, and maybe it should have been as a statement, is that when you look at schools across the country, one that is placed in a state with such well-prepared high school students and with such high, because clearly we can agree that bringing in students from outside the state with higher scores and more preparation, perhaps the best of their classes, so on, will have that impact. But if there was a state that would have a strong resident student capacity, it would be a state that has well-prepared high school students.
Well, Regent Rocha, Chair Beeson, I cannot disagree with that, but my answer was that the out-of-state cohort is above the in-state cohort, which would argue that if we didn't have the out-of-state cohort, we would take a lower cohort from Minnesota students, the overall quality would be lower. But you're right, that Minnesota is a state that has remarkably well-prepared students. I agree.
Regent Rocha, if I can just, one last follow-up, I appreciate your indulgence. And so, one of the things that I don't think we've really talked about is we are getting the best of the best from other states that's exceeding our resident students. What if we focus that same effort on getting the best of the best in Minnesota that are not coming to the University of Minnesota? Wouldn't they have just as great an impact on improving that preparation?
Regent Rocha, Chair Beeson, the world is full of hypotheticals. I will tell you that we work hard on recruiting the best and brightest in Minnesota. Those are students who have an enormous range of choices. They typically are well compensated with financial aid. And what I find, which I lived with my sons, and you will, I suspect, in the future, is there is a certain desire to go away to college that affects kids, and we can't outcompete that process. But we do put a lot of effort into recruiting the best and brightest of in-state students.
Thank you.
Maybe staying on this enrollment strategy topic, we can talk about anything this morning, but this is one that we've all been raising. And Regent Simmons.
Well, thank you, Chair Beeson. This is exactly what you don't want me to say. But I'm glad a conversation about tuition is necessarily about enrollment strategy and enrollment management. But of course, that's not really the right conversation either. It's really about getting out of college, not getting in. We have to attend to a number of critically important goals and metrics, graduation rates, and the workforce of tomorrow in Minnesota depends on the university to generate it. And I don't know the answers, but I know the questions. Of our students who come from other states, how many stay in Minnesota and become productive contributors? I don't know the answer to the question, what will the market bear in terms of what is the elasticity of our tuition for out-of-state non-reciprocity students? I don't know that we have data that anybody can answer except best opinion. I think that philosophically it's very easy for most of us to justify a differential in tuition in-state and out-state because of the fact that Minnesotans have paid the taxes to the state that pay for part of a student's education here. But then there can be philosophical differences on how big that gap should be and whether increasing tuition from out-of-state students in order to give more aid to in-state students, there'll be philosophical positions on that. So I think there's a level of complexity there. And finally, to try to bring it back, I also don't know if as we raise tuition with the expectation that'll be used to offset costs to Minnesota students, we have to make the numbers. It's not just a percentage of the tuition increase, it's the number of students and they're staying. So I find it very hard to make this decision. I'm glad we're having the complex conversation about it, because it's not just which percent to pick. It's what are our ultimate goals with and for our student body and our state.
Certainly the enrollment strategy and the shaping of the class drives, it drives our brand, it drives our workforce, it drives our graduation rates, stakeholder perceptions. Ultimately, it drives a budget too, but I'm glad you made that point. Regent Broad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, it fits right on the heels of Regent Simmons' comments, and I'm a little bit of a broken record on this. And I do feel like we have a little bit of a Groundhog Day situation with this as well. When we seem to have these tuition conversations around the budget, and while they're important budgetary items, it's strategy that we need to be talking about. And the strategy around what we do with our tuition will drive the budget conversation. And I feel like we're driving the strategy through the budget in the wrong direction sometimes, and that's really for this board to work in partnership with the president on not just around the budget time of the year, but in between. And I think that that's where we have been missing the point around tuition and enrollment. I wrote down just a couple of questions. I look at these conversations and say, okay, so I agree with the trajectory of changing the in-state, out-state balance. I agree with the trajectory, but I don't know what the market will bear. I don't know what the impacts will be. 42% to 48%, tell me what that means. So while I agree with the trajectory and have heard those concerns, not just by legislators, but by residents about that balance, what is it that we want to say from a policy standpoint about that balance? So those questions come to mind. Other questions, should a student who makes $101,000 be, their family be required to pay for scholarship expenses that exceed the cost of tuition and fees for others? That's another big question that I think we have to answer. And whether it's $120,000 or whether it's $100,000, the scholarship that exceeds the cost of tuition and fees is a significant question that we need to answer. Should we be freezing tuition based on centers of excellence at this university to drive in additional students in sectors that we need here in Minnesota, or sectors where we're excellent? Should we be freezing tuition for a band of 4 years? So if you come in as a freshman, you leave as a senior, and you know what your tuition is. But if you take 5 years or 6 years, it jacks up after that. That's a policy question that we should be looking at. Should we, what are the other creative ideas out there relative to the policies around the strategy of tuition, not the numbers of tuition, that encourage graduation rates and keep our costs low? So, Mr. Chairman, these conversations are bigger than budgets, and we seem to have them around the budget year. And I think, unfortunately, it distracts us from the statement that the president made in the beginning, which is budgets are expressions of priorities. I am a firm believer that they are. But when you don't have the strategy to back up your priorities, that's where we falter. And I think we're faltering as a board in this manner.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Thank you, Regent Broad. President Kaler.
Regent Broad, Chair Beeson, I am in violent agreement with you. I think I would say we do have strategic conversations about enrollment management and about where to put tuition levels. But as you know, I have encouraged the board in the past and continue to do so to have exactly this conversation. I think it's time, frankly, to think about what is the mix of Minnesota students, reciprocity students, non-resident students, international students. Where would you like to see that? What is our philosophy around need-based financial aid? And should we give above the cost of tuition? I think there are I know there are divergent points of view around the table on that. I think it's a robust and healthy conversation, and I hope as a board with me, you have it.
Regent Cohen?
Thank you, Chair Beeson. And I think my comments will follow both what Regent Simmons and Regent Broad said. I made a little note to myself before you were speaking about, which I hope I will have something to do with the Academic and Student Affairs Committee, but to me that's a perfect place to tee up at the beginning the initial conversation about the enrollment, financial aid, the mix, and so on, and then bring it to the whole board for further discussion. So I agree. I think we need to have those discussions in the fall rather than now. However, since we haven't yet, I also want to emphasize the point, which I agree with very strongly, that President Kaler made, in that I do believe that the diversity of having students from places other than Minnesota, even if they don't stay, but a lot do stay, and that's an extra bonus, enriches the experience for our Minnesota students. And I think it's crucial that, yes, we probably could find very highly qualified Minnesota students close to 100%, maybe not quite as qualified, but would that give our Minnesota students the same kind of experience that they get when they have people from all over the country and all over the world? So I'm not going to say a specific percentage, but I think that diversity of perspective is particularly important in the education of our students.
Thank you, Regent Cohen. Regent Devine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't reiterate much of what's already been said here. I concur with a lot of what's been said here this morning. Mr. President, I do support the 1.5% increase in the tuition that we're discussing at this moment, and and the administration's justification of that, I can subscribe to here in terms of how it's been framed out here this last month or so. And I also support the increase in the non-resident tuition rates in one fall swoop to try to raise that when we've got students here and the families having 2 college-age students right now of my own. The issues of planning and dealing with all that, it just isn't fair to overburden in terms of those people that are already in the system from my perspective. I also want to make note or congratulate you and your staff for the hard work on making sure that this increase doesn't affect 42% of the students. And I think that note really needs to be played out much more. We need to herald that, and that we've paid special attention to that and the cost of attendance of those students. The other thing I just wanted to talk about is the overall cost of attendance. I think is very important, and I think that we've opened some serious dialogues here about what we're doing in the total cost of attendance, because for a parent, you look at what's the bottom line. It doesn't go tuition, it doesn't just go books or this area, that area, it's the total package. And clearly what we've been doing here is we've been focusing on tuition, but I also view the housing, the cost of both residential housing that the University of Minnesota has, and the off-campus or the private sector housing. And I think we've started a dialogue last May. We're going to continue that dialogue further. We had some last month, and we're going to pick it up again this fall. And I think that the impact, the other thing that we learned this year is it has a significant impact on the people that graduate, those that live in university housing for 2 years. It has a huge impact on students in 4-year graduation and, well, I should say retention first and 4-year graduation. And it's significantly higher in meeting our diversity goals, which are also abnormally impacted in a very positive way. And so I look at that and I say that needs more attention on the board's part here going forward. And we do have healthy, significant cash reserves. We had a healthy debate yesterday about how we should be using those reserves in our housing. We can deal with that and take those pieces apart as we go forward and look at what the alternatives are. And then finally, the last thing. Nothing's been said about student fees. And those of you that look through the materials, it's very difficult to compare what we're doing with our fee schedules at our our campus locations. And within fees, there's been a significant change in ACA, We have a health service fee, which is one of the most significant within the fee structures. I know that administration is open to dialogue on that. We've talked about that a little bit. I've talked to you, President Kaler, about that. And I think that now is the time to look at that. So it's the total package that we take some time to review. So those are my comments. I'm supportive of what you're doing. Your staff has done a wonderful job. And in the 3 years that I've been on the board, 3.5 years, I think this is the most engaging dialogue that we've had and what we've been doing. And I do want to thank you and recognize the staff for the amount of effort that's gone into it, because it is significant in terms of what we've been provided and how we've been able to analyze that data and then have the discussion amongst ourselves about what we need to be doing as an overall strategy. Thank you.
President Kaler?
Thank you, Chair Beeson, Regent Devine. Thank you. I appreciate those comments, as does Julie, who is, I'll just take this time to acknowledge publicly, is just wonderful at her job. She's good at her job. And I would, for the record, just indicate that the total cost of attendance this year at Minnesota is $25,374. That ranks as 7th out of 13 Big Ten schools, public, and 8 if you include Northwestern. So I feel like we're in a competitive position, and much of that is reflected in the fact that our housing costs are the lowest in the Big Ten. And I just reflect and amplify on your point that that residential experience is so critical to student success. We need to make it as accessible as possible.
Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Beeson. Just a comment about the process and how the enrollment management dialogue, which is essential, fits in. Really, access and excellence is a moniker for something we've been after here for a while. It started before you, President Kaler, but it really boils down to an enrollment management strategy. So this dialogue is superb. It has to happen. And my comment is about timing. The time is absolutely ripe right now to get to Regent Broad's comment. We heard for the first time yesterday, not the first time, but the first time this year, from our Chief Financial Officer and Lincoln Kelson what goes into our long-range financial planning. That is effectively a dialogue about levers we can pull and things we can do on the revenue and cost side of the equation. You'll hear me talk about that in the committee report. But what we do with enrollment management policy in a declining demographic that Minnesota faces is vitally important, and the 3% tuition request that we went to the legislature with had its genesis at this time last year. When we get to September, so if the ASA committee is going to have a conversation about strategy, we got to merge that in with what we're going to do when President Kaler asks us for authority to go forward with the fiscal year 17 budget. It's all ripe, almost right now, so we don't have a ton of time to deal with it. That probably isn't helpful to anybody other than just to recognize this stuff all comes together, and we have to have that long-range strategy conversation that will manifest itself in an FY17 recommendation. So that's a comment. I don't know if there's any reply there, President Kaler. I agree with Regent Devine. The work that, and that you just commented on, the work that Fitz and Julie do is tremendous, and it's very complicated. Here's my question. As we come up with an enrollment strategy, are we going to look at a system-wide approach? Because we've got 5 campuses, and when someone comments to me, oh, my kid can't get into the U, they typically mean they can't get into the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus. We've got 5 elements here. They all do different things. They all compete in different markets. And I hope as we go forward, we are thinking about, you know, where does UMD fit, where does Crookston fit, where does Morris fit, and where does Rochester fit, because it tends to be a Twin Cities-centric conversation, which is important. It is our flagship, but I think we can do more for Minnesotans if we create a system-wide conversation.
President Kaler?
Mr. Chair, Regent McMillan, you're right. Two comments. To your first comment, not question, I think this is a conversation that's more important to get right than to get fast. And so, you know, we're going to obviously be on the throes of the 2017 budget, which is due to OMB late in the year, and we'll do what we need to do there. But we certainly can have a conversation in the fall about, and perhaps at the board's retreat about this and lean into this in the long term. Number one. Number two, While I treasured Robert Jones's service to the university, when he departed, as you know, I did not refill that position. I took the system-wide direct report chancellors on to my plate. Because I didn't have enough direct reports, apparently. Well, I have many direct reports. And that has really enabled over the past couple of years a robust discussion about systemness, if that's a word. And part of that is for the first time a real sharing of enrollment applications. We have a new web presence so that if you go to the University of Minnesota, you get options about the system-wide campuses. And this has been welcomed by the chancellors and I think healthy for the state. So we are moving in this direction of thinking about enrollment management system-wide in a very holistic way.
I have Regent Omari, Regent Hsu, Regent Simmons, and Regent Broad. You had a question related to that last comment, so I'm going to allow you to.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just to that point, I mean, I had written down earlier too, you know, when you think about the system, the coordinate campuses, you know, Crookston and Morris have parity between non-resident and resident. And maybe that's a strategy that we should be evaluating relative to Duluth in terms of their enrollment opportunities there. And so that it just jumped to mind when Regent McMillan brought up the systems. Thank you.
And if I could,
Mr. President.
Chair Beeson, Regent Broad, the Duluth Enrollment Challenge is not one of raw numbers. It's one of filling areas where there is capacity, and that well might be an approach to addressing that.
Regent Omari.
Thank you, Chair Beeson. Thank you, Mr. President, CFO, and Ms. Tonneson for the work, the Finance Committee as well. It's clear that we got a lot more work to do with some of the comments, and I'm really excited about them. We started the conversation about what the tuition philosophy would be, and it's clear that we need to keep having that conversation. Some of the things that I think about total cost of attendance, one thing I want to highlight with the student fee is my understanding is that the proposal increase from the student fees committee was higher than what we see here before us. So I think that's really big to underscore that even though students suggested a higher fee, it's lower than that. You know, as we think about total cost of attendance, the example that I use is of California. And, you know, outside of our region, the most out-of-state students we have are from California. And when you look at total cost of attendance right now for an in-state student in California compared to an out-of-state student in Minnesota, they're relatively similar. And so as we increase or decide if we're going to increase out-of-state tuition for non-resident, non-reciprocity, this is a market conversation that we do need to be thinking about, and whether or not we'll retain a student or go back to the lovely weather in Southern California. So I think about that. I also think about, you know, one of the things that we will have to address and need to be thinking about is Minnesota does prepare high school students well for some, and what the future of that looks like. The demographics are changing significantly, and from a presentation we got last year, my understanding is that in 10 years-ish, we will not have the same metric, if you will, of student graduating, so we would not be able to enroll at the current standards that we have. So that's another thing that I think we need to be thinking about. And I'll also say this, I highly want to increase the Promise Scholarship to $120,000. I am very torn and would not want to do it in this way at this time.
Thank you, Regent Omari. President Kaler.
Regent Omari, thank you for those comments, Chair Beeson. The fee statement, it really was one of those points where paper came across my desk and then it went right back to the other side because there were substantial fee increases. And we're going to drill down hard on our fee setting process. Actually, I think it's wonderful that we have a student-based set of allocations, and that's a terrific recognition of the role of student government. But we are going to look at that process because it's not clear to me that that's as robust and impactful as it should be. And you're exactly right about the demographics. I mean, to Regent Lucas's kind comments during my review, I, as you know, spend a lot of time on Generation Next issues. And while it is wonderful that we graduate students with good ACT scores, by some measures, the achievement and opportunity gap for students of color in Minnesota is the third or second or fourth worst in the country. And we are not, as a state, preparing students of color, students from low-income families to succeed. And that's a critically important, and I'll say this in the legislature, it's the most important thing for us to fix. And your point's well taken.
Follow-up, Regent Omari.
Yeah, just one last quick comment surrounding the land grant mission that I think we've all benefited from in some way, and I have significantly. There's a lot of debate about what the land grant today is and what the mission looks like and what it will be in the future, and I think that's also something that we'll have to tackle as well, about what the land grant mission was in the wonderful 1800s and what it is today as well. So.
Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following up on what Regent Omari said, as we are a land grant institution, I think we need to be mindful of what we are charging our residents. As we do have a very generous legislature, although it may not appear so this year, we do have a very generous legislature. If you look at the numbers for other states, University of Michigan, Michigan State combined get less money than we do. Iowa, funded by Iowa State, Northern Iowa, all together only get $500 million from the state of Iowa. Their tuitions for in-state students are lower than ours. So we've got to look very carefully at this. I would like to see a freeze for Minnesota residents. The 1.5 is a good start, first draft. I'd like to see us get there with internal savings. And I believe that, long-term, Regent Broad mentioned we need a long-term strategy on where we're going in terms of not only enrollment strategy, we need to look at managing our costs, as well as determining where we want to be in terms of the Big Ten or broader than that in terms of where we are with out-of-state tuition. And I think out-of-state tuition being at the bottom actually hurts us, because I think people look at the differential between the in-state and the out-of-state, and the out-of-state students are paying only about less than $20,000 a year right now. Our in-state students are paying close to $12,000 or $13,000, including fees. And the differential, if you look at it, doesn't look like a great deal for Minnesota students, but it looks like a great deal for out-of-state students, and it should be the other way around. So my question is, what is it going to take for us to generate internal savings of 1.5%? It's on the screen right here in terms of dollars.
Question to the
Mr. Chairman,
General,
members of the board, to freeze the undergraduate tuition rate, not increase it at all, would require $6.1 million.
And Mr. Chair, Regent Hsu, and the reason that we're not doing that is, as I mentioned, 42% of our students will not see that increase, and our higher income families will see that. So that is close to an income-based allocation of tuition, and many of your colleagues view a tuition freeze as a bad idea in the sense that there are some of our families who can pay that.
Follow-up, Regent Hsu.
Mr. President, if on a complete freeze, the 42% would not pay any additional anyway. So I don't really understand the argument other than if we do increase, if we do keep the 42% of Minnesota undergraduates at the same level with the increases offset by aid, they still have to pay other costs. They still have another $12,000 or more, maybe $15,000 that they have to pay, and any money that we can put in their pocket can help them pay those expenses. We'll get their money either way, in terms of, they're going to have to work and take out loans just like everybody else. So I'm not sure that talking about the 42% right now is really the entire conversation. I would like to talk about the 100% of undergraduates, keep them at zero.
Thank you, Regent Hsu. Regent Lucas.
Thank you, Chair. This is the other side of the coin, but I, for one, am not afraid to raise tuition if it involves the things we care about the most, which are excellent programs across the board, diversity of students, addressing the achievement gap. I think in the end, we need to balance all these things, and I think there are, I don't know what the percentage is, but 30 to 40% of our students that higher tuition is not a factor and that we're still a bargain. So I don't want to sacrifice the things that we have to sacrifice in order to keep tuition broadly across the board the same. And it's a strategy. We need a lot of data in order to make these decisions, but I think that we should throw that in the equation.
Thank you, Regent Lucas. Regent Simmons.
Thank you. If Regent Cohen remembers that I actually came from out of state to Minnesota to go to school and stayed, she might revise her position on how good that trajectory is. I fully agree. We've had this conversation before, ladies and gentlemen, that we need to step up to have a strategic discussion and set our principles and high-level goals with respect to enrollment strategy, tuition principles. We've tried to get there, and we just haven't gotten as far as we want to get, and I think that working with the board office, we'll try again. It's an obligation the Board of Regents has. It'll make this conversation go better next time. I would then go on to say that we want the best operating budget we can have. We got to have an operating budget, and not to put these issues aside, but we're going to have to move, and I'm going to support the 1.5% tuition increase and the 7% non-resident tuition increase. I think it's a very reasonable, balanced calculation that is consistent with the principles that we have articulated.
Thank you.
Regent Anderson.
Thank you, Chair Beeson, President Kaler. First of all, I'm getting a great free education on tuition strategies and things this morning, so I appreciate this from my colleagues around the table. I didn't know there were so many ways to look at it. I have a very simple question. I just, as I struggle with outstate, in-state, on the western part of the state, the Dakotas have a very low in-state, very high outstate. Kids come there, I know from California, Texas, Florida, for at least the aviation program. They stay there in the summer of their first year, so by the time they're sophomores, they're paying in-state tuition. Do we have that same issue at Minnesota, and will we have, if our gap is bigger, what retention of outstate tuition payments do we have? Not retention of students, what retention of outstate tuition payments do we have?
President Kaler.
Chair Beeson, Regent Anderson, as I recall, and I will check this data, our retention rate and graduation rate for out-of-state students is comparable to, perhaps slightly, I'm looking to phone a friend here in the audience and I don't see one. Link, would you? Mr. Carlson will give us the facts. Slightly less?
As I,
Mr. Carlson,
as I
please
recall,
introduce.
Broadly, we will get you that number.
Please introduce yourself.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Lincoln Carlson, I'm the Director of Institutional Analysis at the university. To address your question directly, Regent Anderson, we do have a whole residency policy. And in the example you gave, a student would not qualify for resident tuition. They have to establish residency here for a minimum of 1 year for reasons for not going to college, and then they would be considered residents. That's our residency policy. I will go back and check on the retention graduation rates of non-resident students. If it's below, it's only very slightly below the common, the general student body.
Lincoln, Mr. Carlson, that's my memory, is that it's actually at or slightly above. So let's take the average and say it's about the same as our in-state.
And with all due respect, I was more interested in the first answer on what percent might change residency to get a lower rate, but they would have to drop out of college in Minnesota to do that.
They would have to move here for the express purpose of not going to school.
Right. So Regent Anderson, Chair Beeson, you could come, stay for a year, and become a resident and then get in-state tuition, but you can't do that while you're going to the U. That's correct. Thank you.
Regent Regent Rocha and then Regent Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question with a couple of comments, if I can ask. Do we know what is the average student loan debt of a graduate of the University of Minnesota?
Undergrad?
I'm sorry?
Regent Rocha, Chair Beeson, the average undergraduate debt is roughly $27,000, but it's important to note that 39% of our graduates graduate with no debt at all. So that's only the students who have debt have on average that much.
So, but that means 61% have $26,000 in student loan.
On average, that's correct.
So our expectation then, I mean, when we calculate the value or the contribution of a student's family, do we have a means of validating or verifying that if a student is tethered to their parents' income, whether they are actually giving them any of that income?
Mr. Carlson?
Chair Beeson, Regent Rocha. So the financial aid packaging is driven by the student and their family filing a FAFSA,
right?
Federal forms. So the federal government validates income and assets, number of dependents, and produces that expected family contribution. But we do not know where money comes from outside of federal, state, institutional grants, aids, or loans. So I think the answer to your question is we do not know if an individual family is actually producing that expected family contribution in cash.
And so we certainly wouldn't know if the family has other extreme expense issues, maybe a family challenge of some sort that's taking a lot of money, special needs. I don't know, there's other, I guess it'll affect the FAFSA sometimes if it's medical, but still, we don't gauge that.
Chair Beeson, Regent Rocha, every student and family has a different situation.
So when we lump it all together and say, well, because this kid, and it's very hard, as I understand, for a student to separate themselves from their parents' income. Right. You know, you may not have a relationship, but you still have to list their income. Is that correct? So hypothetically, a kid from Owatonna a few decades ago could come from a family without a college education background, who never saved anything, and the threshold back then was much lower. But you could come in with about $1,200 in savings bonds, which covered your books and fees and stuff for one semester, but you're not eligible for any of this other financial aid because we've determined that you have these resources that you may or may not have access to.
Chair Beeson, Regent Rocha, it is driven by FAFSA requirements, state grant programs, federal income tax. I mean, the dependent issue is if you're a dependent on your parents' tax forms, you're considered a dependent student.
Right. Anyway, so well, this is kind of where I'm leading. This is challenging for me. I'm excited about the board's conversation about wanting to engage in strategic guidance and planning so that I can take this budget and lay it against something and say, is this taking us where we say we want to go? I don't have that. It's very ad hoc for me. And one of the challenges too is, and this is obviously a very complex document, Mr. President, but some of the things that we're talking about, like when we talk about the compensation increases, it doesn't break anything out. I don't know. Is this going to our top earning administrative folks? Is this going to our lowest paid groups? Is this part of negotiated rates and so on? And to say that this is the number we need without kind of because it exceeds inflation. It's nearly twice inflation. And so I look at it and say, well, what would be my argument? Why would I, if I'm talking to somebody in Wadena, how would I explain to them why the cost is increasing by twice the rate of inflation, and which creates the new base for future inflationary increases? And I can't give them much more than an ipsy-dixit that this is what it has to be. And so that's challenging for me. But this is my 7th budget. And, in my term, I have 2 of them to talk about. And to some extent, I've seen this movie before. We did the same stuff as President Kaler pointed out to me in our I won't tell anything what we talk about if you don't meeting the other day. He pointed out that when I served on the board, we had consistent double-digit tuition increases. And we were making the arguments, Regent Lucas, that that we have to do this to maintain excellence, and it's not going to hurt because the federal government and even the university for that matter was opening up the floodgates on student loans, that kids were going to get all this money, and to some extent we've created an irrational market. A student doesn't think, it's real easy for an 18-year-old guy to kind of stick it to 23-year-old guy and say, I'm going to take on all this debt and then you can worry about paying for it down the road. And I often think, as I look at my 20 years since leaving this board, what would the state of higher education look like had that student loan money not been available? It would have compelled institutions like ours to restrain costs. Otherwise, the market would not have supported the growth that we've had in costs over this period of time. So when I look at the tuition increase, and I look at the cost increases, which I think are, I give you a lot of credit, President Kaler, it's much better than it was. But when I look at the fact that the legislature did in fact give us an increase, not as much as we had requested, and I look at the very marginal component of the 1.5% increase, I ask myself whether we aren't the ones that missed the signal. When we talk about what the legislature did in giving preference to MnSCU, which I was concerned would happen 20 years ago, but now has finally sort of shown the political muscle in this last session to outpace what the university was provided, I ask myself, are we not the ones maybe missing the signal? And that the legislature, which represents the people that support this institution, want to see a commitment from us and want to know. They obviously have an impression of what we do over here. They have their opinions. We may not agree with them, but fundamentally they're important people. And I believe that if we take a strong stand, if we take the $11 million, now correct me if I'm wrong, Vice President Fitzenreiter, but the $6 million raised by the 1.5, if you do the 10% increase, which I think is reasonable, Mr. President, in the way of getting us to a more consistent differential, and you take the $11 million in additional funds from the state, I believe that gets you pretty close to being able to go with a freeze in a second year. Am I incorrect on that?
Mr. Fitzenreiter.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, of the 11.1 million, we did use 8.7 of it to already lower tuition. We spent about $1 million of it on investments, and we have the 1.4 million in a system-wide strategic pool yet to be allocated post-budget. You could undo investments, you could eliminate that system-wide pool that we want to allocate post-budget. That gets you some of the way towards the 6. You're correct, the 2 million in non-resident gets you a little closer to that 6 million. So
we're getting pretty close.
You'd be 1.5 short.
Mr. President, Mr. Chair, rather, thank you. I don't know if you saw Senator Bonnoff's quote yesterday in the Daily. I think it was the Daily. She had a quote recently where she stated that she didn't think it was appropriate or fair to blame the legislature for a tuition increase because we're the ones who set our priorities. My personal feeling is, having spent a whole bunch of time at the legislature recently, as you might expect, is that taking this step and understanding the $6 million and going with a freeze will send a remarkably strong message to the legislature. And as the economy is strong right now, and hopefully will remain that way, next year we may have an opportunity for additional supplemental funds. And I think that if we demonstrate a commitment to hearing what they're saying, our chances of receiving considerably more than what that 1.5% represents is much greater. Final comment. 6 budgets. I voted for increasing tuition 10 times inflation at times. And I voted to increase the cost of the university dramatically over inflation. I cannot say that I was not part of the problem that led us to the high cost of higher education right now. And I don't really want to be a part of that problem again. Thank you.
Regent.
President Kaler.
Chair Beeson, Regent Rocha. Just for the record, my data shows inflation in 2014 was 1.6%. The 2% increase in compensation will be driven by merit allocation whenever possible. We, of course, do have a fraction of unionized faculty. who will negotiate that rate. And again, on the faculty side, I'll just say, unlike in the private sector, in a faculty job, you get promoted twice in your life. And so the opportunity to make salary adjustments by promotion, which we try to do but don't always succeed in doing, is small. And so when you have a super performing faculty member who's sought by other institutions, you need to have a pool of salary to reward those on a merit basis. And that's where the predominance of this increase would go. And on the point of tuition, you can see, and you and I have discussed, and I suspect we'll continue to discuss, we have different points of view on this tuition dialogue. I think I made it clear in my conversations in St. Paul that we need money, and there is a direct linkage. The Senator and I will disagree on that between what the state provides and what we have to ask students and families to provide in order to do really important things. And I think it's important that the university do those. We are in our competitors' league of cost of attendance. We're in the middle of the Big Ten. And we do really, really wonderful things. And I don't want to disinvest in programs and opportunities to do great things in order to be a little bit cheaper. And we'll have a lot of time to talk about that, Regent Rosha.
Thank you. Regent Lucas.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Beeson. Back to the Promise Scholarship. It's been in effect for what, 5 years? 4 years? I'm sorry. I mean the Promise. It's been in effect 4 years?
Chair Beeson, Regent Lucas, is current form 4 years, 5 years. This will be 5 years.
5 years. So if we had indexed that, if we haven't increased it, we have basically decreased it. So if we had indexed that amount, what would it be now?
Chair Beeson, Regent Lucas, you're talking about the $100,000
$100,000
cap. It would be approximately $107,000 today.
107.
Yes.
Okay. Well, there are going to be trade-offs here. I know that. But at some point, I'd like to know how much we would have to increase outstate tuition to at least index the Promise. You don't have to answer that now, but I really think raising the Promise is something really important to do.
Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if we have a student loan expert in the House, but my question, having read a lot of the fine print in the studies that I think President Kaler quoted earlier about the average amount of debt, student loan debt for Minnesota students. I believe it's only the amount of debt that's been taken on at the current institution that's reporting the data. And I also believe that it does not include parental loans. So I believe it grossly underestimates what amount of student debt is actually out there for not only University of Minnesota students, but all students.
Mr. Carlson.
Chair Beeson, Regent Hsu, you're correct that when we or anybody reports the debt, it's the debt from our institution. We do know and report separately on parental loans. But in the vernacular, the $26,000 is...
We would not know a home equity loan.
Right, and as Vice President Fitzgerald would say, we would not know of a home equity loan or any of those types of things coming in. But we do have the parental loan information through the PLUS program. But you're correct that in the vernacular, the number that gets reported, and everybody reports it this way, is the student debt at graduation.
Regent Hsu, follow up.
I was just going to say, so for example, if we have a student transferring in after 2 years that has, I don't know, $30,000 in debt, and they come into our school and they take out another 30, it's reported as only 30.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
From our side.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Hsu. President Kaler.
And the only point, and we're probably past our time on this subject, is that while you're right about how we account for debt, we also don't have any control over lifestyle choices that students are making, or the fact that our society has a different view of debt than it used to be. When I was a kid, if we needed a new piece of furniture, my mother would take $25 a week to the store and lay it away until it was paid for. Now you go with a credit card and you pay it in the future. It's a lot of conversation we could have about debt and the reasons for it.
We're scheduled to start the capital budget discussion now. If there's nothing else at this point, thank you for the strong conversation, everyone. Staff, thank you, and we'll regroup on the 24th on this topic.
I know it comes with the let's see. Yes.
Good morning, Vice President Wheelock.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Regents. I'm here today to provide an overview of our proposed annual capital budget. As you know, the Regents policy directs the administration to develop a 6-year outlook of its planned capital investments. The first year of that 6-year plan is known as the annual capital plan. These are projects that are estimated to be in excess of $500,000, so they have significant size and scope. But they have a level of readiness as indicated by having a completed pre-design. They must also be funded, and there are projects in there that are moving to another phase in the development cycle as well. In the 2015 request, you will note that the university's request is not assumed to have been funded. We certainly understand that there is a special session that begins today. We hope and expect that there will be some discussion about capital projects, but until such time as we have some certainty, they are not included for any action in this coming year. If necessary, we will update the annual capital budget between now and the meeting later in June. We have significant projects that are across the state. We certainly have investments in our infrastructure to maintain their functionality, to improve efficiency, and to ensure that they are meeting our stakeholders' needs. So we repair and replace aspects of our system routinely. We also have some significant opportunities to do interesting things. So for example, the president had discretionary funds from a donor that were used to help ensure that the space that was built in Northrop when it was remodeled to house an organ could actually be achieved with the funds to actually restore and then install that organ in the space. Mechanical engineering labs were discussed yesterday as well in the facilities committee. We have investments across the system in recreational facilities and in our learning facilities. And then, of course, the funds for the health sciences facility to begin the planning and design for educational facilities and clinical research spaces. The funding comes from multiple sources. Predominantly, we refer to it as local funds. That might be either funds that are developed as part of the pricing and business model for our auxiliary services, or it could be collegiate resources, et cetera. We do have some grants and institutional funds, and the $10 million of university debt is related to the planning for health sciences that was discussed both in facilities and finance yesterday. That's authorizing language provided by the state for the stadium bond refinancing and an authorization to use $10 million of that for design purposes. So, Mr. Chair, Regents, that is the overview of the capital budget. It was discussed, as I indicated, in facilities yesterday, and we will be back later in the month asking for action on this item.
Thank you, Vice President Wheelock. I'll open this up now for discussion among my colleagues. President, would you like to
Thank you,
supplement this?
Chair Beeson. I would simply add that this is a capital budget request that does reflect the goals of the institution, and it really does reflect a commitment to provide facilities for staff and students and faculty to learn, work, and live as we move that next generation into the workforce. So with that, obviously I'm supportive of this resolution and eager to have conversation.
Regents, comments on the capital budget? Regent Devine.
Might I just say, add a couple of comments. We've had a very detailed and very involved conversation yesterday in the facilities about the budget. We took apart a number of items within it. From the time the docket materials were produced, there was a lot of conversation and additional information that was provided, which the committee and the committee members and the board members wanted to make sure that I noted that we were thankful for the efforts that went in to provide that information. I just want to comment on one area. We had two presentations yesterday. One involved the overall discussions of this, and then there was a secondary presentation on the academic health area and the land use and land planning issues in and around that. We started a wonderful debate on this a year ago in May about the housing issues and what would happen in the campus housing arena, and then we had a very detailed presentation this past May with an update on additional housing issues there. And there were many items that didn't get covered in the charge letter in January that we do hope that we're going to continue to have a dialogue and pick up. The one note of caution I might have at this point is really in looking at the governance and the commitment that we have relative to starting down the road of doing significant improvements in the existing housing. I had a comment, and I'm going to share the comment because it's germane to the discussion here today on a purely governance level. When we had all the former presidents together, and one of them came over to me and said hello to me, then recognized that I was obviously on the Board of Regents, and he commented, he said, what is your positioning on housing now today? And I shared with him that I felt that we still needed to invest in the future. And he said to me, I reminded him of the comment that he made during his presidency. He said, I've kicked the can down the road on the housing issue in the Twin Cities campus on the older buildings. And that comment, that he made then, and then now many years later I've reflected upon, we're at that crossroads right now. We have significant investment that we're going to be making in the medical areas going forward that do impact the land and the land use, certainly the super block area, and the other housing on campus. We've entered into a very competitive area now as it relates to that, and I think the attention of doing that and letting the process that we committed to a year ago this past May, we let that roll forward through the summer. We've got about $25 million of commitments in the housing area going forward here, and I'd like to see us instead of going fast, but get it right versus going fast, I think was the comment that was made earlier this morning, and I think this needs a little more attention. The areas, the geographical areas that we're talking about are all big impact areas in terms of mission right now. And I think that work that relates to that and the finishing up on the studies that we've began on the private sector, other options that other schools are using around the nation, other schools in the Twin Cities, private schools are using, that data still hasn't come to us, and I think we owe it to ourselves to evaluate that. So with the exception of that, which we're still obviously in a discussion phase here until the next meeting, those are my personal comments. I think the rest of the items that we've got in the budget are appropriate. They've been, I'd say, very well vetted in terms of what our discussions have been here this last several weeks, and obviously the next couple of weeks we'll finish up on those discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Devine. Other comments on the capital budget this morning? Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've done something on this campus that is quite remarkable. We've created a time machine. I visited my old dormitory, and it looks exactly the same. I lived in room 401 in Frontier Hall, and I have to say, outside of the health safety improvements of a sprinkler system and a new entrance, I don't really see that the place has changed all that much in 32 years. And so my question, and I'm not on facilities, but my question is, how much are we going to invest in these old dorms? And when are we looking at replacing these old dorms, either at their current location or at another location? I know we have an R&R fund. I haven't heard the balance of it yet. Fitz and I talked last night about that, but I don't know the balance of it. So I'm just wondering, how long we're going to be maintaining these old dorms.
Vice President Wheelock?
Mr. Chair, Regent Chu, it's an excellent question, and frankly, it's a question that we struggle with really all of our 29 million square feet at the institution. And based on the previous discussion about the operating budget, we try hard to measure and balance appropriately our interest in keeping our experience affordable, whether it's reliance on tuition for R&R for our facilities or room and board rates for our students who happen to live on campus. When we look at our facilities condition index, as we do every year and present it to the facilities committee every year, when we actually compare our residential units with the rest of the campus, they fare quite well in terms of their maintenance. But you're certainly right that in terms of updates and improvements and, the perceptions and the interests of students who are looking at various institutions, they don't always have quite the bling. Your particular room, of course, we have enshrined in Frontier. But in general, I would say, our effort is to make sure that
Regent Devines was condemned.
In general, I would say we make sure that we try to balance and have some foresight about the level of investments for improvements, maintenance, operational efficiencies, and student experience, and we try to balance the student experience investments with affordability very carefully. Having said that, certainly, as Regent Devine indicated and has been the discussion for some time, with many aspects of our campus land, we have competing interests and competing uses, and there's been a desire to spend more time in July talking about longer term what our strategy is for balancing those uses, particularly south of Washington, and we're intending to come back and talk about that, and longer term understanding how land use may change across campus, but particularly south of Washington, if you will, from the river over to Huron and particularly on the superblock. So we'll come back and have more to say about that in a month's time.
Great, thank you.
Other comments or questions for the presenters?
Mr. Chair.
Regent Rocha.
Just following up on that, and I might not have the best perspective on what you have to have for housing, because as Regent Johnson, his experience with his old part-time job, you get a poncho, a liner, and a shovel, and you live with that, right? So I think that the super block is pretty nice by comparison. But we note that the cost of our room and board is very competitive in our peer group. Is that a result of somewhat antiquated facilities?
Mr. Chair, Regent Rocha, I don't know that I would use the word antiquated, but I would say one of the things certainly that keeps our room and board rate where it is, and as we manage our desire to have it be affordable, is the fact that many of our residence halls don't have outstanding debt. So that certainly is a component that would go into the room and board rates, and it does help us manage that. Having said that, I think there is some discussion about, as we think about the student experience and the expectations in the marketplace, is there some room to reevaluate whether that's the right position to be in relative to our peer group? And we're looking at that, and you'll see that in our discussion as we prepare for next year's budgets.
Thank you.
Vice President Wheelock, could you talk about Sanford Hall? I know that's a large line item and one that, it's a building I've never been in. I had to commute to school. Didn't have the luxury or the means to live on campus back then.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Sanford Hall is located up on University on the northwestern side of our campus, if you will, near Wilkins. Part of it, about 1/3 of that structure, is at its origin one of the oldest buildings on campus. There's certainly been an addition on that since that time, and frankly a remodeling as well of that original portion. It is one that we are saying that will continue to be an asset for the institution. We're recommending in the capital budget, it's the single biggest project in the housing R&R, in that we are recommending a renovation of the bathrooms and an update of the plumbing to continue to service that building.
I was going to say that fundamental point of what our facilities compare to is key and fundamental in the conversation with the cost. But
I have asked Executive Director Steves to work with your staff. There's a lot of interest. This is one of our 5 strategic goals, is organizing specific questions and getting them to you as you prepare for that July meeting, and we can continue with that conversation. Other comments on the budget today? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we are now at chair reports, I believe. And we'll go back to Regent Devine to update us on the Facilities and Operations Committee. Regent.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Beeson. The Facilities Committee, the Facilities and Operations met yesterday. We took on the following action items. First, we had 3 action items, 2 schematic plans, and 1 real estate transaction. We reviewed the schematic design for the Bee Discovery and Pollinator Center at the Landscape Arboretum, and the committee voted unanimously to recommend the approval of the schematic plans. The Bee Center includes 6,700 gross square feet with specialty spaces for central exhibits, teaching, gathering, honey extraction, and greeter stations. Additional outside spaces will provide for live demonstrations and a pollinator garden also. The Minnesota Landscape Arboretum Foundation will fund the project with a small portion coming from the Legislative Citizens Commission on Minnesota revenue. I would move approval of the schematic plans and for the Bee Discovery Pollinator Center on the St. Paul campus.
Second.
I hear a motion and a second. Is any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion carries. Regent Devine.
Next, we reviewed the schematic design for the Mechanical Engineering Lab and renovations on the Twin Cities campus, and the committee voted unanimously to recommend the approval of those plans. The lab renovation project will renovate approximately 30,000 square feet of space and increase the north wing's total program space for research. The renovation will focus on the 3rd and the 4th floors and upgrade space into the flexible research and teaching labs. The project is partially funded by the College of Science and Engineering and the Department of Mechanical Engineering. I would move approval of the schematic plans and the mechanical engineering lab and renovations on the Twin Cities campus.
Second.
Motion and second on the mechanical engineering building. Any conversation, discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion carries.
Thank you. Our last action item was the purchase of 600 25th Avenue Southeast and 649 26th Avenue Southeast in Minneapolis. This property is the White Box Commodities and electric steel elevator site with 32 steel elevators previously used for grain storage that are vacant and empty right now. As part of the purchase agreement, the current owner will remove the elevators and other building structures and prepare the site to be cleaned. This is an opportunity to purchase, and the end use of the property has not yet been determined. I move approval of the purchase of 600 25th Avenue and 649 26th Avenue Southeast in Minneapolis.
Second.
Motion and second for acquisition of the aforesaid property. All those in favor, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion carries. Regent Devine.
We also had 3 discussion items. The committee reviewed the 2016 capital improvement budget, which we just discussed here earlier. The committee raised several questions and had a robust discussion that included much information from the academic medical leadership people around the long-term use and goals as it related to the continued investment in residential housing located on the superblock. Our discussion on those capital master planning items within the district for the academic health was both informative, and in this regard, we expect to revisit the topic and reach some decision and direction resolution in the coming months. On our second discussion item on the Academic Health District, provided historical context and decisions that shaped the AHC facilities footprint that we see today. And I might note it went all the way back to 1967, so it was very comprehensive, the discussion that we had. We outlined much and studied the documents that were needed to replace the obsolete research and educational facilities with more flexible teaching spaces. The presentation deepened our understanding and considerations made on as AHC plans have been developed in new facilities such as the Biomedical Discovery District, the Children's Hospital, where it was just, constructed, and it also provided background as we continue to discuss long-range and long-term campus planning and future campus medical areas south of Washington Avenue. Finally, the committee heard information in its last report on technology capital planning from Vice President Studham, who walked us through the new process of evaluating and approving and scheduling IT capital investments. He reviewed and expected that costs will come in the future of approximately $1 million and will enhance transparency, coordination all the way across the university. We also had 3 information items that were followed up with additional questions. The capital planning and the review of the project management report, the semi-annual report, we will review more fully at our next meeting. And final project review on the aquatic invasive species lab. And then the last item of information that we had was on the preliminary 2016 state capital request budget. With that concludes the report of the Facilities Committee yesterday, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Devine. Report of the Faculty and Staff Affairs Committee, Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Beeson. 2 quick action items and then a couple of significant discussion items. The first action item is the collective bargaining agreement with the Graphics Communication International Union Local 1B. The committee unanimously recommends approval of that collective bargaining agreement between the university and International Union Local 1B. I move approval of that bargaining agreement.
Motion on the bargaining agreement.
Second.
There's a second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion carries.
Very good. And the second item we have for action is the consent report, which included the conferral of tenure for one internal professor that we didn't get in last month's when we handled most of these, and then 5 outside hires. And I move adoption of that consent report, including those tenure conferrals.
Motion on the consent report. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion carries.
Very good. Then we had 3 or 4 discussion items, the first being an overview, the final in a series of 6 parts that the committee has asked Kathy Brown to come and bring various users of the IT or the various users of the HR group before the committee and talk about individual needs and uniqueness of needs and how the various parts of the university draw upon the human resources function. And yesterday was the last in that series, and it was Vice President Studham with the Office of Information Technology, where we talked about the more than 1,200 employees that work in the IT job classification and how they utilize the system, the challenges that he faces with an unemployment rate of something about 1.5% in that field. It's a tight labor market, a lot of turnover and a lot of draw around the city, Twin Cities area, of course, recruitment, retention being significant challenges, but we're doing pretty well in that regard. Our annual update of the U-Plan health insurance, probably the best metric we heard yesterday was that the average industry standard is that 85 cents of every dollar collected gets spent on on providing health care. We're at about 95%, so we're doing better, 95 cents out of every dollar. That's very good, and we reviewed the avoided savings of about $31 million resulting from our self-insurance, our aggressive approach with vendors in negotiating contracts, establishing performance guarantees, and a robust discussion around the importance of a wellness plan. Our third item in the discussion category was our efforts to recruit field-shaping faculty, which is a vital part of the Twin Cities strategic plan, and we heard from Provost Hanson, Vice Provost Levine, and several other members of the team that are working hard on that, and talked about the various approaches that are in use to try and make sure when we get field-shaping faculty in the door, we're able to keep them. And what do we do to get those field-shaping faculties on campus here, including cluster hires, more use of endowed chairs, peer institution comparability, faculty satisfaction studies, and the like. So good discussion on that. And lastly, we had another informational item required by board policy emerging from our 2012 special committee on executive compensation, and we heard a report on compensation of the senior team and talked at length about the challenges of finding good comparative data in that regard. Primary feedback from the committee was that we want to get back to a total compensation look, and that our reports going forward, you know, don't just focus on salary, which is important, but the total compensation picture. So the committee will hear a fuller report again at its September meeting, and is fulfilling its charge under the 2012 Special Board Committee to manage and monitor that. That concludes the report of the Faculty and Staff Affairs.
Thank you, Regent McMillan. Report of the Academic and Student Affairs Committee, Regent Cohen.
Academic and Student Affairs, it's Regent Simmons.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Right.
Apologize for that. You used to be chair.
Yeah, she did.
Wait.
In the old days.
I think Regent Simmons has been the chair all year, but there have been one or two occasions when she's been out of the country, and so I filled in then.
You trying to send me back to Missouri?
Just Rochester. Yeah.
Okay. Would you like to hear the report?
Okay.
If you ask nicely, I'll give it. The Academic and Student Affairs Committee entertained a proposal for policy change on commercialization of intellectual property. The proposed changes enable more nimble implementation of the Discovery Capital program to launch new companies in partnership with the private sector. The university did launch 15 companies last year, which is the most in our history, and currently is on pace to exceed that record this year. Given the intent of this board to respond in a timely way to the dynamic nature of discovery and research, the committee moved to review and approve the proposed changes. The committee unanimously recommends approval of the proposed changes to the Board of Regents policy on commercialization of intellectual property. I move adoption of the revised policy.
I second.
There is a motion second on revising the policy. Any discussion? Would all those in favor say aye, please?
Aye.
Against? Motion passes.
The committee also unanimously recommends approval of the consent report, which includes program changes, additions, and discontinuations. I move adoption of the consent report.
Second.
Motion second to approve consent report. Any discussion? Not hearing any. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion carries.
Thank you. The committee participated in two rich, active, non-action discussion items. I'd like to share a little synopsis of those with you. The first was an update on the work of the President's Campus Climate Work Group and recommendations stemming from its recent report. We talked about how the university, its people, faculty, students, staff, administration, and board can simultaneously maintain commitment to free speech and create a climate where everyone feels welcome, respected, and valued. Issues of speech and civility are taking place on campus across the nation and have aroused vigorous public interest and debate, which is good. We discussed the critical role that faculty governance and peer review must play to assure the responsibility as an essential component of academic freedom. Our second discussion topic was that of really giving us a greater understanding for the complex and diverse responsibilities of faculty in advancing the three-part mission of this university system. Professors from the Twin Cities, Morris, and Rochester campuses offered a glimpse into their typical days, none of which were typical, although it seems that the only thing they really had in common was they work a lot. The variety and the pace were great. This variety and pace naturally leads to prioritization of some work, often around student support, as we would expect, over other longer-term work, such as research and publication. We talked about the need for policies that respect and support the cyclical nature of faculty work. The amount of time one faculty member spends on teaching, research, and outreach varies widely across departments and of course, across an individual's career. These discussions inform our current understanding and will inform our future policy deliberations. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Regent Simmons. Report of the Audit Committee, Regent Broad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Audit Committee heard a detailed presentation by Dr. William Tremaine and Vice Presidents Brian Herman and Brooks Jackson on the implementation of the work plan to improve the university's Human Research Protection Program. Since all of you took part in the presentation, and I thank you all for being there to hear the significant presentation, I won't go into a great detail, but I'll simply say that there was a full and successful implementation of this work plan is essential for this university. The Audit Committee and this board will take an active role in ensuring that the plan is fully and successfully implemented. Our human participant research has been vital to improving lives of Minnesotans and others around the world, and we must ensure that the university's Human Research Protection Program is above reproach. This is what the people of Minnesota expect from us, and this is what we will fulfill in terms of that expectation. All of you had a chance to review the revised resolution that was recommended by the Audit Committee, and you have a copy before you today. Mr. Chairman, I move approval of the revised resolution.
The revised resolution is on the floor. The motion, is there a second?
Second.
There is a second. Is there any discussion about this? Regent McMillan?
Yes, thank you. The volunteer talent that steps up to serve this university and the state is amazing, and yesterday's was a really amazing example of that with Dr. Tremaine, so I just think it's important that we realize what a gift he gave of his time and a lot of other people to help put that together. I had my deepest look at it yet, and quite amazing, so just a note of gratitude.
That'll be noted in the minutes and certainly echoed by the rest of the board and the administration. Regent Omari.
I first would like to echo that as well. We do have some amazing volunteers that put their time on the line, as evident of us as well. But the other thing that I'd just like to say is that it's a very robust report, and we're going to vote on this, obviously, but it is an ongoing process that we all need to be very active in considering as the time goes on, and this is something that it'll continue to, it's not, we can exhale a little bit, but not all the way. So, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Other comments, Regent Johnson?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Regent Broad, as I listened yesterday to Dr. Tremaine, number one, he was excellent because he used words and language that we could understand. Number two, I could feel among the board and the administration and all who are listening, building back a confidence about the process that we are engaged on in the university. And I think that's just terribly important in these matters to have high profile. So, Dr. Tremaine, Regent Simmons, would you express our thanks to him? I'm sure you have, but I think it's very appropriate as he has taken on this vital role for the university.
Regent Broad?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to follow up on Regent Omari's comment, and I think it's relevant to put it in the board minutes as well. When you read the resolution makes it very clear that this board, and through its audit committee, will be actively engaged in this evaluation and oversight of the implementation plan. And so the language of the resolution is specific for that purpose, to make sure that we are having our feet held to the fire as well. So I just wanted to point out that the language in that resolution on page 2. As an aside, relative to Dr. Tremaine, we discussed it in the committee, but I also think it's relevant for the board meeting. Words matter, and he made a very particular point to point out that the language of the human participant, the language we use in that policy is significant in communicating the importance of those participants as colleagues in research. And I thought that we should also have that in the minutes today as they think about the importance of that research in terms of discovery and who it aims to serve and positively impacting people throughout the state, throughout the country, and throughout the world. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, my comments are concluded on that matter.
Thank you, Regent Broad. I'd also like to recognize Regent Simmons for duties over and above, outside the job description, for working with Vice President Herman and Jackson and the administration and helping recruit Dr. Tremaine. And this was really a significant role on behalf of all of us, and your unique qualifications and capabilities and integrity added a great deal to this process. So from a grateful board, thank you. Regent Devine.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to echo the comments that have already been made. And Patty, thank you again publicly for the effort that went in, because I know this is way beyond the normal volunteer duties that are involved as a board member here of the Regents. The question I asked yesterday, and I'm just going to reiterate it again today publicly, is the fact that on this process that we've now are embarking and following up on, one of the important things I think that I'd like to have special focus on is the reporting that comes out of that. I know there's a website. There'll be much information for those that really desire a real deep down, dive in amount of information flow that comes. But I also see that there's when you look at the number of constituencies, there's us, the Regents, there's legislators, there's faculty, the greater public. And to have a somewhat simplistic recap that we're, I think, in part required to have, at least in part of our reporting on a monthly basis, that we have that so that it's a capsulization or a summary format so that people can quickly understand that what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then as a part of that report, which I think is equally important, is to outline the expenses associated with it so that we're accountable to the public on what we're spending to do this and to do the reporting, so that everybody understands with full disclosure the efforts that are going in as part of this, because I think that is an important ingredient of how committed we are, because as it was noted yesterday in the presentations, there is a fairly significant financial commitment here, and to be able to tabulate that in some format to say that we're not only engaged in it, but we're spending the money to make sure that it gets done correctly. I think that's an important part of whatever the process is going forward, and I've echoed that to President Kaler. So thank you.
It's also a good point. Thank you, Regent Devine. Regent Simmons.
No, thank you, Chair Beeson. I'd like to acknowledge the really terrific involvement, leadership, and cooperation that came from the administration of the university, the president, Vice President and Dean Jackson, Vice President Herman. It was a terrific group effort that put management and governance on top of an important issue.
Well, we do have a motion second on Regent Broad's resolution as revised. Not hearing any further discussion, would all those in favor please say aye.
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 Against? Motion carries. Thank you, Regent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in discussion items, the committee heard and discussed the internal audit plan for fiscal year 2016. The plan is risk-based and continues to reflect the principles of the integrated framework for internal control. The plan includes 25 audits of university processes, units, and systems. A significant amount of the audit coverage will be used to assess both the implementation of this work plan for improving the Human Research Protection Program and examining the new systems and processes created by the enterprise system upgrade. These are both big and significant projects. The committee also discussed the internal audit, the audit plan, and received an update on internal audits performed by the Office of Internal Audit since February of 2015. While the implementation rate is low, much of this low rate can be attributed to the more than one-half of the recommendations being audits receiving their first follow-up, and 50% of the remaining recommendations were not past their target implementation date. The committee and internal audit will closely monitor the implementation plan for the next update. And we also had one information item where the audit committee received the controller's semi-annual report, and that concludes my report of the audit committee.
Thank you, Regent Brabham. I go back to Regent McMillan, the finance report. Your report.
Thank you, Chair Beeson. Yes, the Finance Committee met yesterday. 4 action items. I'll start with those, and we've covered a lot of the discussion items, so we won't go into depth there on the budgets, which were the primary topic. The first action item is action on the Greek loan program. Yes, Regent Hsu.
Do I need to recuse myself now or later?
From the vote, probably.
And I also would recuse myself.
Okay.
Yeah, would you go back into the...
I would note that Regent Hsu excused himself or recused himself from the discussion at
Regent Devine.
At
the committee.
At the committee yesterday, and now Regent Devine is as well from the board. So we have a proposed loan program to improve the safety and general condition of housing facilities with the Greek organizations. It's a jointly owned or a jointly administered, jointly funded project with UMF, and will be administered by UMF REA, and really focused on safety and general housing conditions, a $3 million fund that individual chapters and houses can apply to, and again administered by the UMF REA. So I move adoption of the resolution relating to the Greek loan program.
Second. Motion and second on the Greek loan program approval. Discussion, Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's a good thing. I understand that there are some advantages to the university as well, and some kind of protecting our neighborhood, if you will. I would like, I don't know what the proper process here would be, but were I to have been a part of that committee and conversation, I think there are other nonprofit student housing entities in the neighborhood that might be facing similar needs. I don't know that to be the case. It used to be the case, and so to the extent that there would be interest in those entities and also ensuring the life and safety of students that are living in those arrangements, I think that's something that we would consider in addition to the nonprofit Greek housing that's in the area. So that would just be a request for a review of that from the administration.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. That'll be noted and passed along to staff. All those in favor of this motion, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Against? Motion carries.
The next 2 action items relate to a legislative authorization to refund and then reissue debt associated with the TCF Bank Stadium. And what we're requesting approval from and what the committee has proposed is to refund the debt that was issued in 2006. And Minnesota law authorizes that, and we went through the financing of that in the committee at some length, about, well, exactly $10 million in savings associated with refunding and reissuing that debt will then be freed up and utilized for pre-design and design of improved health education, clinical research facilities to meet the needs of the medical school and the academic health center here on the Twin Cities campus. So the first item would be to move adoption and resolution related to refunding that debt.
Second.
Motion and second to refund the stadium debt. Is there any discussion around that? Not hearing any. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion carries. Regent McMillan.
Thank you. The second and a related item is the resolution to issue the new debt associated with that, and that's where the savings come from as the interest rate comes down when we reissue it. And again, this was all authorized by Chapter 69 of Minnesota Laws of 2015 and directs us to refund these special, or to reissue these special purpose revenue bonds. And that's what we will do. So I move adoption of the resolution in your materials related to the issuance of the new debt.
Second.
Motion and second to issue new debt. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion passes. Regent McMillan.
All right, and the final action item we have is the consent report, which typically deals with items, purchase of goods and services over $1 million. We have 3 of those: Egan Company, Werner Electric, and Gray Bar, all related to construction and remodeling activities, and an underwriter choice of Barclays Capital to carry out and effectuate the refunding and reissuance that we just authorized. So those 4 items are in the consent, and I move adoption of the consent report.
Motion on the consent agenda report. Is there a second? Regent Broad, second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? Motion passes.
Thank you. 3 discussion items, the first being the fiscal year 2016 annual operating budget. I won't go into any restatement of the conversation we had yesterday. We've already had it here again today, but Associate Vice President Tonneson went through that in depth, and we had a good, robust discussion about the operating budget, followed by our Chief Financial Officer going through the financial elements of the capital improvement budget, which we've also discussed this morning, so you don't need to hear a rehash of those details. But our third item was very important, and I alluded to it in my earlier comments, the long-term financial planning efforts that a couple of our recently departed colleagues had put into place. We had a very good discussion focusing first on the revenue side assumptions that go into the development of a fiscal year 2017 and beyond look, and then equally important, a deep dive into, not a deep dive, but a dive into the cost, expense, and investment side assumptions that become part of the President's longer term and upcoming recommended budget. So I think when you put those 2 together, we have a nice slide, if you look in the materials, that I think that our Chief Financial Officer called levers, and those are levers we can pull, and there was quite a bit of discussion around 3 different scenarios that we could use on the revenue side, where we look at different assumptions about growth of the state budget, growth of our share of that budget, going in similar or opposite directions. The direction from the committee really was that we're going to have that same level of robust scenario planning around the expense side of the equation as well going forward, because we do face challenges demographically and obviously with the market on the revenue side. But I think it is a very good discussion, and I'm indebted to our colleagues, Mr. Fabinius and Mr. Allen, for having pushed that process forward in years prior. So that concludes my. We also had reports. We had the opportunity to review the quarterly investment advisory committee update and the asset management report. That concludes the finance committee.
Well, it does not conclude your reporting today. You've got your third committee, which is the committee litigation region.
Well, I'm going to put people to sleep if I keep at it here, but the litigation review committee also met yesterday on June 11th. A resolution was considered and approved to authorize closing that meeting to the public, and in the closed meeting, a discussion was held of matters subject to the attorney-client privilege. That concludes my report and my reporting.
Thank you, Regent McMillan. Regent Cohen, the Committee on Academic Medicine did not meet this month. Is there any old business for the board today? Regent Cohen.
Thank you, Chair Beeson. I don't know whether it's old business or new business, but I think it is the business that this may be the last meeting that you are chairing, and I just want to say a vote of thanks to a job that's been very, very well done. You have been enormously conscientious. You have looked at detail after detail. You have guided us well, and I just wanted to say it's very, very much appreciated.
Thank you, Regent Cohen. Very kind. I do have one more meeting, which is in 2 weeks.
Well, then take back what I said now.
My nameplate disappears off.
That's right.
Okay, now and then we can settle up in 2 weeks here. Thanks very much.
But I will say, Mr. Chair, that on behalf of Regent Hsu and Regent Anderson, it's been the best 3 months of our lives. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Regent Johnson.
Mr. Chairman.
Chair-elect Johnson.
Not sure, again, if this is old business or new business, but I want to express to each of you your vote of confidence in going forward with board leadership and with Regent McMillan. We've had a number of conversations already. I think this, and I'll be brief, that we want to be respectful and listen to one another, and the debate and robust discussion that we had around the budget was very good today. And I hope that we have more of those in the future. Certainly want to work in collaboration and consultation with the President and his administration, build confidence with citizens of Minnesota, Governor and Legislature, and certainly our students, faculty, and staff. And I think about 3 words in moving forward. We want to anticipate what we might see around the corner at this university. We want to be strategic, and we want to govern this university. On a personal note, I'll say this. I'm open for counsel, open for suggestions, open for guidance, and yes, open for constructive criticism. Do not be afraid to voice your opinions about matters pertaining to this university. So again, Mr. Chair, Mr. President, and my colleagues, I'm grateful and hope to work with you and serve this university.
Thank you, Regent Johnson. On that note, we will conclude and reconvene at 12:30. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.